Want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Today's guest was your 2008 Driver of the Year, 2012 Driver of Eminence Award winner. He has 7 championships, 5 of them consecutively. He has 4 Pro Solo Challenge wins. He was your overall Pro Solo Challenge winner in 2009. So those 7 championships, 5 consecutive. ESP, 2002, 2004, 2006. F-Stock, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. Pro Solo, he went ahead and mixed it up. In 2002, he won an F-Stock and then hopped into ESP for Solo Nationals. Also an F-Stock, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. SSR Pro Solo, 2014, 2015. And ESP, he fit in 2004, 2006. This is none other than the owner of StranoParts.com, Sam Strano. Sam had enough information, which makes sense, he's been racing for a little while, that we're going to break this into 2 episodes. I mean, who wanted a 5-hour episode? I'm sure somebody out there did. So we're going to break this into 2. This episode starts with his history. We talk about some of the other cars, like the first 91 LE Camaro that was nationally competitive. He talks about McCamey Autocross School. He talks about how he has his cars set up. Is it really set up loose? Or maybe not. Should you adjust yourself, the driver, or the car? He even fits in a Mark Daddio story. The question I wrote down is it true or what is true? Maybe Mark will come on and clarify. He even includes a Sam Strano speed secret. He also chimes in on the looking ahead. This section also covers his mental approach between the runs. Of course, a little left foot versus right foot braking. And we end up with a little bit of talk here about the GT3. Yes, he would like to have one. I hope you enjoy this. And for those of you that have connected via the website with your email address, it looks like over 20 of you never got the confirmation email. I will reach out and get your input on the show. And thank you for those of you that have filled out the form with your thoughts on the show once you sign up on the website there, autocrosstalk.com. And thanks for the feedback and sharing of these episodes. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you learned, what stands out to you. You can connect to us on Facebook.
Sam, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. Sorry it took, 8 months or something to make it happen.
Oh, too funny. Just today, Van Townsend's like, hey, have you thought about getting Sam on the show? I'm like, yeah, we meant to do it last week, and I got tied up. Like, I thought I was totally free, and the wife grabbed me there.
Kind of what happens. I'm in California right now at Shelly's place, so it's when the weather's nice, I got to go play with the tractor or, do a million things.
Play with the tractor. I did look at Craigslist again the other day going, oh, I sure could use a tractor. So tell us, when did you get started with autocrossing?
May 1st, 1994. I remember it pretty clearly because it's the day Ayrton Senna got killed.
Who?
Ayrton Senna, Formula One driver.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Formula One. Everybody can know that about me. I don't pay a ton of attention. So where were you autocrossing then?
I attempted to, and that's probably the best definition I can give you, attempted to, at Central Pennsylvania region, State College. Basically, I was at Penn State. That's where I gave it a shot the first time, and it didn't go very well. Bad enough that I didn't go back for a little while because it was pretty humiliating. My parents kind of chastised me a little bit, and they're like, really? You're just going to quit? You always wanted to drive cars fast. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I went back and tried it again, and that was marginally better, but I figured, well, screw this. I'm not going to let it beat me. And then I worked really, really hard for a really long time to get to a point where I had a clue.
So why you were disappointed? Why? I remember showing to my first one thinking I was good at something I've never done. What made you think that you weren't good, or did you have expectations, or why did you have those better ones? Yeah,
it was kind of the same thing. I grew up, reading books, and when they reopened Watkins Glen in '84, I think, my dad took me up to the IMSA races, and I watched any kind of road racing I could find on TV. Kind of knew how things worked and everything like that, and I was 20 years old and went, this should be a breeze. And yeah, went out there, and it wasn't a matter of I thought I was bad. I was bad. I was I was the slowest car there by, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 seconds on a little tiny local event. I pretty much got hammered by everybody. It's a small lot, had some crossovers and stuff. And it's probably the first understanding I had of course design. And when I started building courses, I try to be very aware of how visuals are, because we've all seen autocross courses that are confusing as hell. And that was me, and I couldn't find my way around and, really felt like the proverbial fish out of water. So, yeah, I sucked.
I sucked. And the biggest thing was the Miatas beat me by 10 seconds. And I just thought I'm like, how could that car beat me by 10 seconds, having no clue how good those cars are?
Yep. Well, what's the answer with the answer for autocross is Miata. Doesn't matter what it is, it's just Miata.
I'll admit I was on Craigslist looking today. Just locally, though, I didn't get too crazy there.
When they get a Miata with about 250 horsepower, I'll think about it.
Hey, you can get your favorite engine bolted into that.
Well, I already have my favorite engine bolted into a Corvette, so.
John had just brought up the RX-8 for SM, I guess, with the turbo, putting a turbo engine in there. I was like, he was like, it's just a big Miata. I'm like, never considered that.
He's an RX-8 freak.
Yeah, yet he loves the BMW, so.
Well, I love the BMW too. It's probably the only car I constantly get out of every time I drive it and giggle. So when I bought, he had another 330 Ci hardtop that it's kind of been through a bunch of autocrossers' hands. Chris Dressler had it and sold to John, and it's a white car and it's really nice. So I basically forced John to sell it to me, and didn't even negotiate with him. So that's kind of Shelley's everyday car when she's in Pennsylvania. But of course, as soon as I bought it, everybody started harassing me about when I'm going to DSP, because every time I get out of John's car, now that we fixed it, I literally just kind of want to roll on the ground laughing because it's a riot. It's an absolute riot, which is a far cry from what it was when I first drove it at I guess, Spring Nationals when he first bought it.
Yeah, and he called it a big ball of grip. I drove it before he got it on heat-cycled Kumos or something, and all I thought was, this is not quick, but it sure does stick once you get going.
First time I drove it was literally the weekend they picked it up. They met in Lincoln, and the thing is, and lots of people know this about me. Some people don't understand me. It might be an East Coast thing, but I'm pretty blunt. I don't hide my feelings very well, and I'll tend to tell you what I'm thinking. But I drove it, and I'm like, it doesn't handle bad at all. I'm like, it won't get out of its own way, and you better do something about that. And he kind of like, it was before he knew me as well as he does now, but it kind of looked at me like, well, what do you mean? And I heard his little comment about not to make this the John V show, but when I cracked on him at Nationals about why on earth would you drive a car without a diff in this class, then he probably took it as an insult. Now he would know I was, basically just poking at him.
Yeah. So take us back. What was the first car you autocrossed?
A 1983 280ZX automatic that had been crashed into a tree with the right rear corner, so it was all sagged down. So I bought it cheap. Very common with those cars because they had a semi-trailing arm rear suspension that made them, camber jack, and every time you'd lift, it would pivot. So basically, I thought it was a 911, an early 911, and that was my first autocross car. Taught me a lot. And actually, it was probably the second one because then, like I said, I was 20, so I kind of floundered around in that for a year. I think my fifth event ever was Northeast Divisionals, which was probably pretty stupid of me to go, but I had some reasons to do so. Went up to New York and very, very distinctly remember finishing 21 seconds behind Mike Solomon in his CRX. Even with race tires, a great set of 185 6014 Yokohama 008 RTUs that a friend of mine had given me. Same deal. That site was big. It had a 1 mile big square runway kind of set up, and I got 15 seconds on the course and had no idea where I was going from that point on. So that was my fifth event ever. That's what I started in, and then not understanding SCCA rules, I kind of figured, well, I don't want to run against the CRXs and stuff that are stock. They're killing me. Having a business that relates to cars, I bought some low ring springs and some sway bars and put them on the car, and then found myself in CSP instantaneously with the same car with a whopping 135 horsepower. at the time, the current national champion, Lane Sanders, was living around Harrisburg. So I got to run against him all the time and, got my ass beat thoroughly. And then I tripped on a 280ZX turbo somewhere at a lot. And I went, oh, hey, all my stuff will switch over to that. And it's a faster car because it's 180 horsepower. So I did that. Got to the point where I was not bad. Generally I was an ASP at that point. Had a, giant set of 15x7s on it. And also an automatic. But got to the point where the only cars I couldn't beat in ASP were the real ASP cars, the Elons and like Dave Newman's 911 with a 3.2, update backdate motor in it and stuff like that. So, even locally I could run with the top, on smaller lots, I could run with the top super stock cars, which were RX-7s, FD RX-7s at the time. Very distinctly remember Kent Rafferty riding with me at a local event. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but I power braked it, and it was a 3-speed auto, and tried to build as much boost as I could, and he kind of just looked at me like, why are we sitting here? And I left my foot off the brake, and took to about 30 miles an hour before the car went. From 30 to 60, the thing was pretty quick. From 0 to 30, it wouldn't move at all. And he goes, well, when are you going to hit the gas? And right about then is when it actually finally came on boost, and we took off running. And when we got done with that run, basically he kind of looked at me and went, if you had a faster car, you might do better. So I went, hey, and that kind of stuck with me, and that kind of led to a 91 1LE Camaro that was run nationally by a guy named Dave Cole. And David finished like second and third and, done real well nationally with it. So when that car popped up, I kind of went, I think I need to try that car, and ended up buying it on a credit card, which is really hysterical. But and then it went from there. That's probably where the pony car love started. For some reason, I'm better at pony cars than anything else.
That's interesting.
Stuff around.
What do you think made you fast in that time? How were you studying? How many runs were you getting? What was teaching you back then? Were you riding with people? Were you watching?
I didn't get fast till about probably early 96. It took me a long time. Tim Aro, who has gone on to win a couple championships since then, and started that solo pro school. He worked for Evolution and owned it partially with Mike and Pat and some other guys, and they kind of ended up going their own ways. But Tim was he had raced some motocross, had some factory contracts and things, and also had done cross country skiing. Like went to the Olympic trials. When I was at Penn State, he was in the PhD program, and turns out we lived about 150 yards apart. So we met at the first autocross that we both went to. The same autocross that had 30 people at it was the very same event was our first autocross each. So he had a competition background and was older, than I was and stuff. And so I learned a lot actually from him. We would talk and talk. We basically do what we're doing, you and I are doing right now, for hours on end. And all kinds of conversations. And, it was about the time that Jim and Gene had started the McCamey Autocross School. And, I remember Tim going, I think we ought to go do that. I'm looking at it going, I can't afford to do that. And I have so much to learn, I don't think it would help me. Now I know that's not true. But we just talked a lot about theory and stuff like that. But my biggest thing is I just didn't really have, he had a feel for things moving around, whether it was the skis or the motocross bike. I didn't have any of that. I had to develop all that. And he helped me a lot, with that stuff. But I was dog slow. I mean, the funny thing is, and he pointed out, somewhere during that time, I'm not sure exactly when it was. It might have been very late my first year in 94 or something. It rained somewhere, and I was all of a sudden super fast. And turns out it wasn't because I was super fast. It's just that the rain didn't bother me because I had been underdriving the car so much in the dry that I just kind of drove the same way in the rain, and all of a sudden, I got to the limit. And the car, kind of moved and wiggled around. He calls it a squiggle, which is probably, it's a great description. I still use it to this day. And it took forever to sink in. He's like, you got to make the car feel like it's wet when it's dry. Because if you're not doing that, you're not at the limit. And if you're not at the limit, you're not going to go fast. And I understood it. I understood what he was saying, but I couldn't actually do it. And then he at the time had an 86 MR2, which is, by the way, the worst MR2 you could ever hope to autocross, because the 85 had a rear sway bar. The 86 did not. So it didn't want to turn. And the way you had to turn it, and this, you'll love this, being that you're spending time in the GT3, and it kind of relates to the conversation you and I had at Spring Nationals. The only way to make that car turn was basically go in, slow down, but you had to stop slowing down going about 10% faster than you thought you could make it through the corner. So when you let your foot off the brake, there was still momentum, that the motor would kind of help the car pivot around. If I drove it the way I drove my ZX, it killed all the energy in the car. Car didn't want to turn. So that's kind of started to sink in. At the end of 95, so 2 solid years of autocrossing, I ran every fun run I could run, every event I could run. Probably 25 events those 2 years. Did everything I could possibly do except for a real school. And Tim and I decided, hey, let's go to Nationals. Maybe we'll do okay. And the C stock that year was that was the year the BFG 226R1 was around, which might even predate you. But they had this thing with the Evil Groove of Doom. People think Hoosiers wear badly, which makes me laugh, because literally we got 6 runs out of a set and they recorded in the first groove. So we drove, and C stock had 60 cars entered, 61 cars entered. And a couple of those guys didn't even show up. 57 ran, and I finished 51st. And Tim was like 27th or something. So we kind of went back to Pennsylvania very dejected. I was 10 seconds slower than Michael Butler, who won that year. 5 seconds a course. So that was after that. And in 96, 96 is when I actually started figuring stuff out a lot. I don't know exactly what happened, but it was that third year when things started to kind of click about, being able to go quicker. I still didn't. It took a while to figure things out to a point where I kind of knew, I guess, how to win, which kind of started to happen in 97 after I got the Camaro and went to F-Stock.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that. I started that because that's a recurring theme, that people are okay drivers. Somebody rides with them and they say, hey, if you were in a decent car, so therefore you're like ding, ding, ding. So if somebody says that to you, or you haven't hopped cars out there, people listening, get in a car that's competitive and see what happens. Because the same thing for me, after sucking at Nationals, I think 2 years in a row, I'm like, I can't beat these people. Let's join them. And then I'm glad you covered, I think everybody starts and either they're too aggressive or they're not aggressive enough. And you covered that before I even got to ask you. Because in the wet, you did so much better. So maybe somebody can take that and realize if they're faster comparatively in the wet, they're just never getting to the limit, is what I like to say. How do you phrase that to somebody you're teaching?
How do I do? I mean, it just depends. I guess when I'm sitting in the car, I kind of watch. You can learn a lot by actually watching the person, like their body language, their facial expressions. Some people are scared to go fast. Some people are just scared to go fast because they don't know what's going to happen. And that was kind of, I think that was my thing for the longest time is I felt like if the car moved in the dry at a higher rate of speed and stuff, that I, wasn't sure if I could deal with it. I guess I think that was subconscious more than anything. You just don't know what you don't know, right? And if you're not used to feeling a car move around, you're not, you don't know what to do with it. Funny thing is, I thought I should have been pretty good at it because, I had a rear-wheel drive car. I grew up in Pennsylvania. If it snowed, I was the first idiot out there going sideways everywhere. So sliding a car around never bothered me, but, that's at a very slow speed most of the time. I didn't have winter tires or anything like that back then. So, I see it a lot in schools, and you just kind of look. You can almost see people's gears turn sometimes, and some of them are just afraid to get to the limit. Some of them, mostly men, they don't care. They want to go right over the limit. I think it has a lot to do with their personality. Just kind of if they're a little more conservative in their real life, they tend to underdrive the car. They're guys that like to go bungee jumping. They're usually the first ones that are, coming to a corner, and I'm sitting in the passenger side wishing I had my own brake pedal.
This makes me wish I had video from the first couple runs I ever did, or the first couple events. I would love to see what I actually did. I think I overdrove, at least I kind of hope, but then again, at 10 seconds behind, well, yeah, you can push through every single turn, I guess, and waste 10 seconds.
Well, most people overdrive the slow stuff and way underdriving it in quick. It's that's a pretty common truth, and you see it all the time. It's a lot easier to, get a lot more ballsy in a slow corner than it is in a real fast tank or something.
I've got to repeat again for anybody that missed it in the previous GT3. I didn't realize I was overdriving the slow stuff because I kept assuming that, hey, it should go faster than the Civic everywhere. And I get John Ames in the car. And I said, what'd I do wrong there? Did I not get enough weight on the nose? He goes, you just overdid it. I'm like, really? He goes, the car can't go that fast for that turn. And it really just, it's like, really? I just had that assumption that, hey, this car is magical everywhere. It's like, no, you're just overdriving the car in the slow parts. So even though I've done it forever, having the wrong assumption has been painful to learn this year.
Well, that's the thing. The GT3 is similar to that MR2 I drove, Tim's MR2 that we drove way back then. In that, if you drive in and you're too slow, if you kind of overslow the car when you turn the wheel, there's no dynamic action. There's no weight transfer going on, right? So then at that point, you're just purely relying on the grip of the front tires. That's it. It took a long time, to figure out, well, hey, if you can make the car kind of pivot around, the center of the car somewhere, then that's a lot less turning you have to do with the front end of the car. But you gotta kind of believe it. And the first time you feel it, and you get it to happen, whether it's by mistake or something, most people get the little Beavis and Butthead, light bulb over their head where it kind of flickers on a little bit, and they go, oh, that was kind of good. That didn't feel, I think the car turned better. And you're like, well, yeah, of course it turned better. So it's a trick, and it's a learned thing, and it helps if you can ride with somebody and get them to, if they can explain it in a good way. But it's hard. It's hard to do, and frankly, street tires sometimes make it worse because they don't have as much grip in the front, and depending on the tire you're on, they're not always as quick to react like in the quick of the the back of the car. So like the Rivals are that way. They're a little sluggish feeling, so it's harder to feel the edge and tell exactly what's going on and stuff like that. So the GT3 on Rivals, I could see why it might take a little more time to catch on to that.
I still haven't caught on. And yes, we ran Rivals in the back and Bridgestones in the front, just because it was nationals. Go ahead and throw them on there just for that.
Sure. What better time to change crap?
Exactly. Hey, it was all for fun. It was still fun. It was fun. But and I still don't think I've still felt that in that car. It's a little bit like it moves some. I'm like, compared to the Civic, I'm like, it's not moving, buddy. I would be like counter correcting or something, or yet I've spun the car off into the grass twice. So it has moved at times, but not when I want it to move. So that's,
yeah. Well, well, like I said, the brakes in that car. We talked about the lift braking thing, and on paper, I have no problem with it. There's a lot of people that do it very well. Most people don't. But even if you're good at it, the problem is with something like a Porsche, right? It's got giant brakes that are super, super duper effective. And if you're dragging the left foot when you're trying to do that, it just, again, it kills that momentum, that energy in the back of the car.
I got to admit to you, the last event or two I drove it, I did not left foot brake after the first brake zone my brain clued in. And it did seem like magically it was just better. My times were better. Everything was better again. Yeah. I'm like, wow, that little bit of delay or something really did help it.
Yeah, the trick is probably better just from the entry to the middle, right? Because the car probably rotated better in that phase of the corner. Wouldn't have been better probably anywhere else, but that's the trick. It's, you get on the brakes, you come off the brakes, and it's trail braking basically, but it's a timing thing. And left footers tend to get on the brakes later. Which makes the front tires do more, right? The front brakes do more on the way into the corner, and that kind of kills some of the rotation, and they tend to stay on the brake longer.
Longer through the turn, you mean? Like longer in the turn?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Right, because it's easier for somebody if your left foot's on the brake, your right foot's already on the gas or over the gas, so you don't have to make a conscious effort. Hey, I've got to move my foot over here, back to the throttle. So that's why you get a lot of people where they'll overlap the two pedals, and if you think about it, that upsets the car less, right? It makes sense. If you're on the gas and you start to apply the brake before you come off the gas, the weight transfer is going to slow down. But what a Porsche needs, especially a current Porsche that is much better behaved in the back end than, say, a 1978, 911 SC, is you need to actually provoke them a little bit to make them do something.
Yeah, that's so true.
And that's hard.
And like you told me, it should be like the Civic. So I want people that drive front-wheel drive to realize what he's talking about having a car pivot. I was always told, maybe it was David Fowl saying, if you can have the car turn without turning the steering wheel, it's faster. So basically, I think Sam is telling us if the car will rotate some, whichever platform it is, and you can control it and not turn the steering wheel, you should be faster through that turn.
Right. That's why my cars aren't set up loose. A lot of people, and I think this is overall probably most faster cars are set up this way. I've put, I'm not one of these guys that lets any Yahoo, drive my car, especially, the current cars. They kind of, you don't want to give anybody the keys to 500 horsepower. But, when you do need it to pivot. And if the car does rotate, you don't want it loose. That's the problem. I see a lot of people who are newer to the sport, and of course I talk to a lot of people because I sell parts and those kind of things. And I like to think of it that I sell less parts and I do more kind of setup work with people because I am constantly telling people, no, you don't want that. And then usually, in the cartoon bubble above my head, I'm kicking myself in the ass because, that's not how you make money when you're a salesman. But it's the right thing to do, I think. But, when people overdrive the car pushes. Their reaction to that is, well, I have to loosen it up. And then they loosen it up, and the car's undrivable in anything faster, like slaloms or, high-speed transitions or even entering a high-speed sweeper. And what they're doing is they're compensating for generally what's a driving mistake. So my car is actually kind of a little bit on the tight side because it allows me to drive the car in and make it pivot, do things, like when I come in and I'm on the brakes and I kind of pop my foot off the brake pretty abruptly, the car pivots under that situation. If somebody doesn't know that, they're not going to be able to make the car do it. Then they get out of the car and go, I don't know how you drive that car fast. It doesn't want to turn, which is not true. My stuff's not terminally pushy or anything like that. But, it definitely, is slightly on the tight side versus the loose side because you can't drive a loose car fast. If you're making big corrections all the time, you're not going quick. Might feel quick, but you're wasting a lot of time and energy, in that slip angle and stuff like that. So I say that, and that's my Achilles heel with the Corvette, and I know that. I picked the Corvette that I don't think is actually the best autocross car, but it's a nice car, a very nice car, and I'd rather own it. But the problem with it is a pony car you can slide, you can power slide it like a foot. It's got a solid axle. You don't have camber changes. You don't have weird things like that going on. And that's really what I learned to drive in. The Corvette was, I think, just a continuation of, high-powered rear-wheel drive kind of cars. Also, somebody who shall remain nameless kind of made a snide crack to me one day about after I had won a bunch of championships between S-Stock and ESP, about, well, yeah, but what if, it's nice, but you got to try driving a real car sometime. And that's actually a friend of mine, and he was being an asshole on purpose. But I realized a lot of people thought that about me. And I kind of went, well, screw that. I'm, of a certain age that I think it's time that I have myself a Corvette. So I kind of did it to prove I wasn't a one-trick pony, I guess. But the thing is, you can slide the Vet around and get away with it, but it's not fast. But it's so damn tempting because it's fun.
We need to get you in a front-wheel drive Civic, I can tell, or something. It doesn't have to be a Civic. No. Oh, let me see if I can phrase.
Hey, I have a GTI I daily drive.
Oh, that's right. I've seen some of that. Is it the R?
I have a GTI.
Okay. I saw the newer one came out. I looked at those a little bit when I was kind of almost car shopping. So let me see if I can phrase this.
Love it.
When you guys have your car set up tighter, and then you can initiate the rotation with the braking or doing something probably more abrupt than other people can do, being tighter, as soon as it slides a little bit, it probably catches itself, or it's easier to catch because of how you have it set up?
It's easier to catch. Again, I don't want people to think the car is super tight. It's not. But I need to be able to trust it in high-speed transitions. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before about most people overdrive the slow stuff and underdrive the fast stuff. So the time really to be had on an autocross course is don't bone up the slow stuff by doing something stupid and going in too fast and everything like that, and get through the fast stuff fast. So you need a car that can go down that fast stuff fast, and it basically you just have to be able to survive the slow stuff and be able to get power down and get the hell out of there. you can have a car that turns really tight stuff, awesome, but you're going to be hanging on scared to death in the faster stuff. And if we're going 60 miles an hour, you're covering a lot more ground every second than if you're going 25 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I can totally relate because I don't think my Civic is set up nearly as loose as other ones. As in when Kim Whitener drove it, she looked like she was trying to get it to rotate and it just wouldn't. And it's that whole point you just said, in transitions, slaloms, I want to just be on the gas as much as possible. And I don't want to have to try to catch it in those elements really at all.
Right, exactly. And that's, there's a physics to it, right? I mean, you look at it and you think all cars should be set up exactly the same, right? Because, if they're all Civics, you set them up all the same because there's only, a perfect amount of speed or something you can get out of the car. But the fact of the matter is, and this is kind of one of my things, right? I kind of sometimes get on cases of certain engineers that are friends of mine. Shoei's an engineer. Shoei's a mechanical engineer. So we talk about this stuff a lot. The problem with theories, I think, a lot of times is a computer is not driving the car. Yeah. We are. And I'm different from you, and you're different from somebody else, and stuff like that. So, you're still the operator, and your inputs still make the car do certain things. So, not every car is going to be set up the same way. And when people kind of argue with me in that way, it's fine. It's their prerogative to do so. But I'm generally the first one to point out, well, great, but I'm pretty sure that all the drivers for Hendrick Motorsports aren't going out there with exactly the same setup. Or every two-car team for an IndyCar team, or, even Formula One teams. They have data. They can share data. We can share data, with Solo Storm and stuff like that. But, in the end, the car's got to behave and work in a way that you can trust. And that's the hardest thing. And because you can't really teach that to somebody. And I see it a lot in schools, where I get to drive a lot of different cars. And, some cars are bone stock, and some cars have $1 zillion thrown in them. And, I've driven some really good ones, and I've driven some really bad ones. And I've seen why people do certain things based on what they're doing with their driving. Like I said, with the slow stuff, they keep bombing into slow stuff, and the car never turns, because they're 38 miles an hour too fast into a corner. And then they start wanting to tweak the setup based around that. And I'm like, well, dude, how about you just slow down and give the front tires a chance to do something? And they look at you a little funny sometimes, but when you can finally get them to do it, and all of a sudden the car turns, next thing you know, it becomes loose for them, and they didn't touch a thing on the car. It's why at schools we tend to try and make sure people don't touch anything, because and at the end of the day, we don't really do it so much anymore. But back when it was McCamey School and stuff like that, at our end of the day meeting, we would basically say, so how many people's cars understeered when the day started? And half or 2/3 of the people would raise their hand. And at the end of the day, we'd ask the same, we basically asked them in a different way. We'd say, well, how many people had understeer this morning? The hands would go up. How many people have a bad understeer now? No hands would go up. One hand would go up, something like that. And we would remind them, maybe not so gently, that, you didn't touch anything. We didn't allow you to touch your car at all. What's caused it to stop understeering is you. We fixed you. So until they get to that point where they can drive well, it's very hard for them to set a car up.
And so at what point do you think someone should start tweaking and playing? Do they need somebody riding with them? Can they look at overall points and say, hey, I'm not breaking 900 or 950? There's probably something in there kind of average where people shouldn't even be tweaking and playing with the car. Let's say if you get in the car and can beat them by 5 seconds or 2 or 4, it would point toward their faults more so than anything they can tweak on the car.
Yeah, I mean, some people are better. Some people are better actually in faster cars, strangely enough. If they have better car control, it's personal. It's a tough decision. And again, I talk to a lot of people who want to mod their cars. First, they buy a car, they want to mod it. Can't say I blame them. They're toys, right? For most of us, we can all drive around in box stock, Toyota Camrys, but we don't because we like something better than that. So, from an autocross situation, I generally tell them, look, you could play the game of not touching the car for a year and drive a bone stock car on, some crappy tire for a year, but you also don't learn kind of what the car can do. at that level. You learn what a stock car can do, and if we were running some spec class where you had to run a stock alignment, on stock tires or something like that, well, great. But, in a way, it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess it's like shooting a gun and making somebody shoot a BB gun for a year before you ever hand them a 22 or a 9mm or something like that. People can learn on those things. I wouldn't, by the same token, I wouldn't hand somebody like a 50 caliber Barrett, who's never had a gun in their hand and go, hey, knock yourself out. Right. So, it's personal. It's, part of it is what they want to do to their, to their toy. And for me, a lot of that judgment is just, well, how serious are they about autocrossing? They do it for fun and they're horsing around and they want the coolest car and they don't care what class it fits in. Well, sure, they can mod their cars differently or sooner or whatever. If it's a street class, they should at least have an alignment. And, if the car's old and needs some shocks anyway, I would probably put Coney's on it, for instance, before I put a set of, say, Bilsteins on it. Not that Bilsteins are bad shocks, but you can't adjust them. And if you're new and you don't know what you're doing with it, which is generally what I hear, as the excuse for not ponying up a couple more bucks for an adjustable shock, they go, well, I don't know what I'm doing with it anyway. They go, well, yeah, but in a year you will, or at some point you're going to have to try. And if you have a shock you can't play with, you're stuck. And then you're going to have this argument over again. Well, how do I know when I should pony up for nicer shocks? And I'm certainly not a proponent of everybody having $5,000 shocks. In fact, I'm probably the opposite. People I know get a kick out of it, considering I sell MCS and JRZ and things like that. My car's on a set of off-the-shelf Coney Sports. Some tweaks. I have some rod ends at one end of my car and stuff like that. But generally you can't go wrong with the Coney Sport. It certainly is a baseline for anybody. And for most cars, they're going to cost you, I don't know, $500, $600, $700. So you should at least do the basics. Find out if everybody in your class is running some sort of bigger front sway bar. Hey, there's probably a reason for that. You might not want to run the biggest front sway bar or as big as what somebody else is running, but front bar, put an alignment in it, put some decent tires on it, and then see what you've got.
Yeah, and I can't say enough that getting an alignment, I paid a lot of money for some alignments, and it's been the best money I've spent by far.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, well, I mean, the tires are the only thing holding the car to the ground.
Yep.
And, if basically, the car is walking on the edge of its shoes, like somebody who's all bow-legged and stuff, I mean, you don't make very good use of your expensive tires that way.
That's probably why we weren't fast when we first started. We probably did not have the right tires or alignment. I'm going to give myself credit for that. Oh, I've got to mention that I got to ride with you at Spring Nationals on the test course there and Matthew Braun, and I just gushed about that. I thought you were just showing off. So he's driving, and I'm thinking he's just trying to have a slip angle the whole time in all these sweepers. You're like, no, I drove like this all the time. And then I get Matthew, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? But he admits, he goes, I set my car up really tight so then he can do what you explained, although I'd say even more violently, like attack the brakes to make the car pivot, and then he's just back on the gas like no other. I mean, that still boggles my mind how much of an experience it was. It was just great to be able to ride with both of you and see what level you were at of grip. It was amazing.
Yeah, you have to. Well, Matthew is. It's funny if you watch from the outside. I don't know that it really comes through because you hear all kinds of crazy things from people sometimes. I mean, I've had people tell me I'm super smooth. I've had people tell me I'm herky jerky. I don't really pay attention to any of it. I just kind of shrug, and I'm pretty smooth. The only, to me, it depends on the corner, right? So, for instance, I took Shelley's car up to Thunderhill on Sunday, actually, and did a track day up there. And you watch the video of that, and there's no abrupt motions of the hands or anything like that. And, because I don't need to. The corners are bigger. They don't come as fast. But when you're autocrossing, things come at you a lot quicker. Matthew, and it kind of goes back to the car setup thing, too. I'll guarantee you more people would have a much easier time driving my car than Matthew's car. I know what sway bar he runs. It's massive. I mean, it's basically the size of a redwood. I've run it. I've had one in the past on my Grand Sport. And he will readily admit this. Matthew's a left foot breaker. He swears to God he doesn't look ahead. I I believe that to a large degree. He doesn't not look ahead at all. He left foot brakes. He tends to pound both pedals. He tends to drive very straight at things. And you would think that's the last car you would want to have set up, the last driving style you would want a tight car for. But what he does is he basically provokes the car, like I talked about earlier, about makes the rear end kind of do something. He's also a lot more okay with driving a push than I am. So, he's okay with having some slip angle in the front tires than I'm not. But like the Lotus, for instance, I kind of know what he did on that car. I raced against him in that car a lot. Shelley had one. That car was set up super tight, and the whole thing was basically just stuff the thing in, chop the throttle, basically get the car to get the back of the car to do something, and then get out of town. My stuff, I'm kind of more, I guess, traditional in that way. I like to carve corners more and do things like that. But it's neat. I don't know if there's many other people that have ever gotten to experience him, his driving style and my driving style, especially on the same course, the same day, in the same kind of car.
Yeah.
So,
it's priceless. I'm like, oh my goodness, this just seeing what y'all did was amazing. And in my mind, I'm like, how can I blend these? I'm like, what can I take from here and take from there? But of all things, also you said about car setup matching you. Realize if I was to go and buy your car versus Matthew's, neither one of them may fit me. So I've seen people buy a car or drive someone else's setup, and I'm like, you might want to change that. If you can't handle it, if you're not doing well at all, you might need to see about what you would change on that to match you. Have you seen that or help people figure that out with cars?
Sure. I mean, again, to go back to the interview I heard, that you did with John Vinenbos, you've got to tweak things a bit. Sometimes what you're buying is not what you get. Mike Snyder, my co-driver forever, famously for me, bought a car that was, quote, ready to win and everything. And when we got our hands on it, one of the first things we saw was the clutch wouldn't hold. It went through 3 clutches before I made him change clutches to something else. And the floor pan had like 6 different tears in it from the torque arm that was on the car. Car had done well at Nationals that year, but I couldn't drive it, and it was tearing itself apart. So we changed it drastically. And it took a while. That car got sold. I ended up taking all that information and putting it into my 2001 Camaro, which won me a bunch of championships and things like that. It's actually the car Darden owns now and won with this year. So that made me pretty happy that James won in it this year, 10 years after the last time I won in it. So, but yeah, you got to tweak it. Problem is, there's a funny story I'll tell you about that too, but people sometimes are too willing they just want to change things, right? Whether it's remodeling their house or doing something like that. But back in end of 96 is when I bought my 1LE, my 91 Camaro. And it was a clone of Mark Daddio's 90 Camaro, 89, 90, something like that. I didn't know Mark Daddio. I mean, I had barely started in this, right? And that car kind of led me to knowing the Kozlaks and knowing Mark and stuff like that. Daddio swears this isn't true, but I swear to you that it is. I had the car for a little while, month or so. I ran it we had an airport site in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, and there was one hellacious bump on that course. The rest of it was awesome. But there was a hellacious bump on a taxiway that was kind of like more of a tar and chip kind of surface, as opposed to the asphalt the rest of the place was. And every time I hit the bump, the back of the car would hit it and kind of take a pretty abrupt step sideways. I did not touch anything on that car until that day, and then I went, it goes back to kind of how do you learn things, right? So I said, I think if I had a little less rear rebound, it would settle it down over that bump and make it easier for me to get through there without having to, catch it so much. So I took some rebound out, figuring, hey, it's an easy thing. I can put it right back, if this doesn't work, whatever. Drove it. It was better for me that day, the whole thing. Great. I left it alone. I went to another event in Camden, New Jersey, and their site, it's Philly region. It's right across the river. And if you know anything about Camden, New Jersey, it's usually in the top 3 places for murders every year. And there's this abandoned warehouse that was half fallen down. Like a whole wall was missing. You could see into it. Not the best place. And it's winter and it's cold. You're right on the Delaware River. And Mark Daddio walks up to me. We're driving, and he walks up to me because he knew the car. He was good friends with Dave Cole. And, of course, it's a clone of what Mark had. And I don't know Mark at all. All I know is, what you read, at the time. And, I'm 23 years old, I guess, at this time. And he introduces himself. And then his next words to me, and I'm sitting in the car looking up at him as he's talking to me. His next words to me are, "Don't touch it." And I said to him, I'm like, I wouldn't dream of, I said, I don't want to mess it up. I know it's a good car. That's why I bought it. That's why I went through the extraordinarily painful process of buying that car, which included a cash advance check and all kinds of things. And I said, the only thing I did was I took a quarter turn of rebound out of the back shocks. And this was awesome. Mark kind of looked at me and he cocked his head a little bit sideways and kind of blinked a couple times. And knowing him now, and actually he's, I think we're fairly good friends now. I like to think that, but I can almost see the smoke come out of his ears. This doesn't compute, and he didn't even say anything. And he just kind of cocked his head at me and shook his head and kind of walked away. Probably something like, this kid's hopeless. And years later, I told him that as I got to know him, and he goes, "I didn't do that." And I'm like, "Oh, yes, you did." And he goes, "No, there's no way I would have done that." And I'm like, "Let me tell you something. At 23, knowing, what you had done and won and everything, and, that car that I had bought, I'm like, it left a pretty big impression." So, I'm glad I did it, but that's the thing. That's why I tell people, I'm like, I get not wanting to buy something you can tweak, and sure, you can mess it up, but if you mess it up, you can also set it back. And if, frankly, if you're autocrossing and you're serious about it, at some point you have to decide, I need to try something. I mean, people get scared, and I tell them all the time, I said, you make adjustments every day of your life. You change the thermostat in your house. You change how much throttle you give the car leaving a stoplight. This is not scary. You just have to kind of understand what's going on and pay attention to it.
I'm swallowing a big pill right here because I don't change much. Although, what I should tell people, or what I've realized, is your shocks can go bad, they can change, your tires can go bad, so you kind of need to change things just to see if they're still okay, or at least check these things, like me dynoing my car engine. There's lots of things to be changed or at least checked because I've had them bite me many, many times. Well,
we all have. And that's the thing with tires. And, tires are a perfect example. Yes, shocks fail. What I have learned over the years, and this sometimes it takes a while because, sometimes I can be pig-headed. Sometimes things happen slowly and you don't realize it's actually happening until you one day find yourself going, how did I end up here? And then you got to start looking around. But I'm the first one to blame myself, driving-wise. And what I found over the years, there's 3 or 4 prime examples of over the 3 years I've been doing this or whatever. It's never actually been me. Once I kind of learned what I was doing, it's not like I forget suddenly how to drive. But I'll start chasing a problem, and if it's a subtle problem, things feel a little out of sorts, and when they feel out of sorts, I think it's just me, quote, being off that day or something, until it starts to kind of build. And when I start to see a pattern, damn it, this thing is just not right. Then I'll start looking for whatever it is. And, once it was tires, twice, actually, it was a fried limited slip. And stuff happens. The limited slip that burned up those 2 times was the same model limited slip that I had used for years previous that didn't have wear problems. But the company got sold, or merged with another company. It became pretty apparent eventually, looking back on it now, what had happened. I think they changed their metallurgy on some gears. All of a sudden, we started getting a lot of metal in the oil, which we never got before. That's obviously something wearing in the diff. The diff quit working. Problem is, it didn't just break. Every time you drove it, it got a little worse, a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. Next thing you know, I'm left with a car that does everything fine except for middle off. When you're trying to get power down, it's loose as hell. And both times that happened to me, the very first time it happened, actually, I was an ESP. It was an ESP trim. It was an aftermarket limited slip. And I remember getting on the power on, big fat Hoosier A6s, and it spun the right rear tire pretty hard on a lot that it should have never done that on. And my first thought wasn't, oh, God damn it, the diff's broken or anything like that. Nope. My first thought was, why does this feel like an F-Stock car? Because that's how badly it put power down, but it was an ESP car. And when I said that to myself, then it was, again, that proverbial like light bulb that kind of goes over your head and flickers on very slowly. I went, oh God, it feels like an F-Stock car. And, you know, literally half the speed difference between an F-Stock car and an ESP car for years and years and years is the limited slip. That's half the difference. Suspension, all that other stuff is only the other half. So as soon as I said that, it was, you know, then the dots connected and went, oh, holy hell. Put a new diff in the car. Car was great again. Problem is I made the mistake of putting the same diff back in the car because it had never given me problems in all the years prior. And then that one did the same thing. And then that's what I learned that, hey, guess what, dummy? Apparently something's changed, and just because this has worked for you before in the past doesn't mean it's going to work now. And then I had to switch back to a different back to a diff that I used to run way, way back before that. And that's what I used in 2006, actually, to win with. So, you know, it looked like a step backwards to most people. But if they didn't understand why I did it and everything, it was very obvious to me why I did it. And I've explained that to many people since. That diff would still wear. But the thing is, I knew that diff was going to wear. It was supposed to wear. And so when the car started acting, you know, loose coming off the corner, which is a sign of a worn limited slip, I realized, oh yeah, the diff's going bad because it's supposed to. This doesn't surprise me anymore.
Yeah, you were looking for it.
So you just yeah, exactly. And tires, you know, same way. You know, tires heat cycle out. You know, kind of famously, most people know that I really love my Hoosiers. But all this stuff about street tires had a lot less to do with the fact that I love Hoosiers and things than there's always been games in tires. Always been. You know, whether it's a street tire or, you know, we ended up on Hoosiers. They're DOT tires, but you can't control what a tire company does. They get faster and better, and things are constantly changing. But, you know, any kind of rubber, and we all know this, you know, we've all gotten in our desk drawer and grabbed a pencil and then went to erase something, and the pencils, the erasers rock hard, and it doesn't work. It's rubber. It you know, ozone and everything gets to them. Every tire gets harder with age. The softer the compound tire, generally the faster it's going to get harder with age. And doing what we do, you know, it becomes pretty apparent. But again, it's kind of like my limited slip burning up. Generally, heat cycling happens, you know, over a period of time. And there's a danger in running a tire that, quote unquote, wears really well. Because, yeah, you look at it and go, it's awesome. Look how much meat's left on that thing. I can run this thing 372 runs and then flip them and get 100 more. The problem is they're not fast past the first 50 or, you know, whatever, depending on the tire.
And that's the same thing that bit me. I think a durometer would have solved it. I saw them like, wow, those look really funny. I felt them like, oh, they're done. They're rocks. Right. Yeah, people found that out pretty quick about the second generation Hankook, version 2 or whatever. Every tire does it. Some do it faster. Some have a, you know, trick layer on top that wears away pretty fast, and then what's underneath is hard. Some are the opposite, like, you know, like the Magic Toyo that you probably had on your Civic. You know, that was soft the whole way down, but every other R1R wasn't. Oh, those are so good.
You know, by design. You know, by design from Toyo. So how do you know? I mean, if you were, you know, running a 225 45 17, and you're looking at the Honda guys running them down the slicks, you probably think the same thing until you run a fresh set to an older set and realize, oh God, you know, no, there's a marked difference here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you got to test it. You got to change things.
One thing that helped me realize both two different cars that there were issues with the car, yet I blame myself for months, was getting in another car. I mean, this last year Pro Solo finale, I jumped back in a Civic that's all set up great by David Whitener, and I win. I was like, oh. I mean, I started doubting myself, especially at a Pro Solo where you get 12 runs. I'm like, I'm not competitive. Get it all realigned, go to the next Pro Solo. I'm not competitive. I was like, how can I really lose a step that quick?
Right, and part of the problem is it depends how, you know, everybody kind of defines how competitive they are differently, right? Some of it's how brutal the class is. Some of it is, you know, we're all a little bit ego-driven, right? Or else we wouldn't probably be doing this. You know, if you're 0.3 off, is there something wrong with the car? I kind of look at that and go, no. You know, I can easily get out driven by 0.3 of a second, right? I'm also not the smallest, lightest guy, you know, in the world. So, that's always a detriment. But if I start getting thumped by a second or, a second and a half, and it happens more than 1 week, then I start scratching my head and going, there's something, I've done this long enough now, and I think I'm in good enough standing that I can kind of go, something else is going on. Then it's a game of finding out what the hell it is.
Yeah. Now it's so weird that we question ourselves first, but it seems like that's kind of ingrained in most people to say, hey, it's us. It can't be the car. My car is fine. It's just a car. But
I don't know. I guess it's like everything. There's people in this world who would, blame everything else for everything. So trust me, there's lots of people that it's never the car. It's never them. It's always the car. And, most of those cases it's not. So, it's a character flaw in a way too, just like being an arrogant, ass is, and that's kind of hard for me to balance because I'm pretty unassuming. I'm actually pretty shy. Anybody who doesn't know me from autocrossing, I don't say much. Most of the time, I'm not a party going kind of guy or anything like that. People think differently in this because I've got a pretty good track record and I've kind of established myself to a point where I'm not really shy about telling people what I think because I'm not usually a mile off base.
Well, you're an expert in this field. You're making me think of Gary Vaynerchuk. He said, everybody thinks I'm this outgoing, crazy guy that's always talking. He goes, I know this one area so well that I talk. He goes, get me in politics or something? He goes, I sit there, I'm quiet. He goes, so that's what I feel like you just basically said. When it comes to autocross, you know it, you sell the parts, you win. You should have an opinion that you share. That's good for all of us.
Right, and probably the biggest thing is, and again, I deal with this day in, day out. There's always an internet expert somewhere with something. There are parts vendors that do the same thing. They will tell you, this huge story about how great this part is and that part is, but when push comes to shove, especially when it comes to something like autocross, you get into this he said, she said argument sometimes with people, with customers, right? They'll call you, they'll ask you what you think. They say, yeah, but this guy says that. And it's different than what you said. In the end, I don't know. What else do you do other than go, well, what's his track record like? That took a long time, to be able to, I think, kind of lean on that. And I don't ever say that to anybody unless I'm kind of pushed into that corner where I have to, literally, if one guy says this and another guy says that, and the poor guy stuck in the middle doesn't know either of you personally, all you can really do in the end is point to results. Yep. If one heart surgeon has killed 100 patients in the last 3 years and the other one, hasn't, which one are you going to go with?
Yeah. If one wins and has helped other people win, who are you going to listen to?
I would like to think most people see it that way. Not everybody does, and that's fine. That's generally my justification. On the other hand, I'm always very big on telling people, I'm like, well, look, do what you want. We all, have to learn, and probably the guy that helped me the most when I first started, aside from Tim, even much earlier than, Tim, like the first year, was another guy that was not ever super fast. He'd autocross for a long time and stuff, but he kind of like took me and showed me the ropes, and sometimes he would force me into uncomfortable situations, like becoming his assistant solo chair, 1 year in. And then I remember I asked him something one day, and he goes, figure it out for yourself. And I'm like, but you know the answer, and he was like, yeah, but I'm not going to tell you. And he didn't. And I had to figure it out for myself. It was kind of like a daddy, a daddy kind of thing to do to me, I guess. But at first I was pissed, and since then I'm kind of like, I see exactly why he did it.
Yeah, because you truly learn. Make the mistakes. I feel like I've made them all at some level in autocrossing, and I remember them better because I made them.
Yeah, it's that whole give the guy a fish, and great, you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, and he's good for life. So
yeah, and
there's a lot to it.
In this sport, then we can help other people if we truly understand something. Like, oh, look, this is what I'm doing. That's another thing is I wonder how many people know why they're fast or what they need to work on.
I don't know. Well, again, I think, some of it has to do with their personality type. Some people don't want to know why they're fast. Or if they happen to be, there are those few people that show up that just seem to know what the hell they're doing. I've heard people say that about me, which always kind of inside my brain makes me, fall down on the floor laughing. They didn't know me when I was horrible. And I think that's the case. Unless you're from the same region, you're not really going to be aware of somebody until they're kind of quick. But we all have to learn, and we all learn in different ways, and some things are more punishing. So when people ask me questions, no matter what it is, if we're walking the course at nationals or, about a car setup thing, I'm probably sometimes to my detriment, not quite as, pointed as I should be, as strange as some people might find that to believe, because I usually kind of buffer it, like something about like, well, I think you'd want to do this, or, I want to do it this way because. I'll let them kind of, on their own. They can agree with me or not, or they can ask me 10 more questions to see if they agree with me, and that's fine. I'm not usually the kind of guy who says, you have to be here. In fact, I remember, here's another old story. We were at Forbes, for nationals one year. I guess it was probably like 2005 maybe, something like that. One of the last years, we were in Topeka. Yep. And we did this is something that everybody needs to hear, whether they teach schools, have been to schools, anything else. Junior might flip when he hears this, but it was long before he owned the school, so this is pretty hysterical. We did the course walks for the seminar, before nationals. And we kind of divvied up, north course, south course, the whole thing. And I remember there was this big open, it was a big open area, and it kind of went into a decreasing radius corner. And it was on the south course. And it made me laugh because there was a group of West Coast instructors, there was a group of East Coast instructors, and there were a couple guys that live in the middle of the country. I remember Andy Hollis was one of them. I don't remember who the other one was. And as we all walked to this corner and entered this corner as we're walking, all the West Coast guys were in one spot, all the East Coast guys were in another, and the two Midwest guys, Andy and whoever the other one was, were kind of in the middle of the road. And I just remember looking at it, and it struck me, that just where you learn, or where you autocross or where you race or something, has a direct effect on what you think you should do in this particular area. One guy does it, kind of trickles down to everybody else. Everybody kind of ends up with the same mind. We then stopped and had a discussion, I guess I'll put it that way, about it, which kind of maybe devolved into, a couple, people rolling their eyes and stuff like that. I was just kind of standing off to the side, taking it all in, because I wanted to hear what everybody, said, what their justification was for being here and there and everywhere else. And in the end, what I kind of came to is I said, well, you know what? You got some pretty fast people over there and some pretty fast people over there. Generally, to me, compromise means going down the middle. So I kind of ended up changing my mindset to what Andy, had done. I don't even know that Andy knows that story. He may remember it happening. I don't think I ever told him that part of it. But I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go down the middle. I'll hedge my bets by not doing, going to either extreme and go down the middle. So it's funny how that happens, and it does, which is why, at schools, for instance, we always, have two instructors. You go through an evolution school, you're not going to get the same guy both times of the day. If you may not get the same person for the next three schools. We all have a different way of doing things. I think I'm a little biased in my way because I was actually trained by Jim McCamey, who started the school in the first place, and I was teaching and kind of understood some stuff, but my light bulb really came on when basically I ended up taking a full phase one from Jim after I'd already started teaching. I was the first person. There used to be a rule that you couldn't teach. You wouldn't be hired on to teach unless you had been through the school. I was the first person hired not under that system because I had actually helped Gene Kinzer at the Denver, way back when at Stapleton. They had a tour and a pro back to back. And I remember watching Gene drive an ESP car, and I didn't know Gene at all, but I had some friends that knew her, and I kind of made some comment about, well, if she did that differently, I think she'd be a lot better off. And they told me to tell her, and I basically went, nope, I don't know her, and I'm pretty shy, and they basically drugged me over and forced me to tell her, at which point she said, get in the car. And I got in the car, and I drove, she drove, and she said, what do you think? And I told her what I thought. Next thing I know, I'm hired. Problem is I didn't know how to teach. So, and I hadn't been through the things the very specific things the school had taught that Jim had come up with as teaching tools. When when those were embedded into me, kind of like later than that, because I went to Jim one day, we were teaching, and he was actually in there at Meridian, Mississippi. We kind of had an extra instructor, and so I kind of went over to Jim and I said, hey, I don't know that I feel 100% comfortable, like, knowing what I'm doing is exactly what you want or right. And instead of kind of bluffing my way through it, I just kind of asked him, which was embarrassing. But he said, well, get in your car. And I'm like, So now I kind of really felt bad, because I'm like, God, I'm working for this guy, and now he's basically going to put me on the spot and say, well, show me what you know. He didn't do that at all. Basically, he just taught me a phase one. And I ended up, instead of teaching that day, I ended up taking as a student. And that was the day my light bulb turned on. And it wasn't that little flicker light bulb. It was like a big spotlight turned on. It was like, oh, my God, this makes sense. Now I get it. Oh, yeah, gee, okay. And I remember that very clearly. So everything I do is actually kind of based directly off that day, because then I understood what he wanted taught and why. And I'm actually, I think Tom Kotzing's the only one that's been teaching longer for the school, whether it's evolution or McCamey or whatever, than I have. So that was in '97. And I remember that to this day. The thing is, people discuss things differently, right? And I could say something to you and you don't get it, but Shelley could say the same thing to you in a different way, and it sinks in.
Yeah, I
right?
think
and that's all we care about.
I think that's what's huge on this podcast, is hearing different people's aspects and thinking. And you just hit on something I've been wanting to do, and will hopefully find the time this year. I want to take all the schools. I remember trying to sign up a couple of years ago for phase one, and Junior's like, no, you don't need that. And I'm thinking, no, I do want to take that. It's seat time is seat time. But what you just said was so key. If I don't know how to teach, that should be able to help me. And in reality, if I can have 2 or 3 or 4 different instructors take it several times, I'll see the different teaching styles, which is something I'm very interested in knowing that about anything in life, but especially autocross. What would different people tell me? I mean, I've had plenty of people tell me things, but I want to know even what you guys, different people, think.
Yeah, there's so I agree with you, actually. So this may get me in trouble with my boss. Mike and I are actually very good friends. I'd say we're more like brothers, than anything at this point. Sometimes we squabble like brothers, but I think we do whatever we could for the other one to help him out. I was teaching before Mike was even around. I taught Mike at a phase 2, actually, and he told me he took a phase 1 earlier that weekend. And I told him some things differently. And to his credit, I remember getting in that Camaro, and he looked right at me, and he goes, I don't want any of this 80% crap. I want you to drive the wheels off this thing, because I know you know how to drive this car, and I need to see how it's done. Great. Okay, I did it. We talked about some things. His light bulb turned on the same way my light bulb turned on. But I think where we disagree slightly, and here's the thing, and I will put this out there right now. Evolution Performance Driving School is not affiliated with SamStrano. I don't own it. It's Mike Johnson's business. It's not mine. I teach for him. I teach. He knows how I teach. He's fine with it. We're very similar, but one of the things was, going back, the fact I've been around for a long time, nobody used to be able to take a phase 2 before they took a phase 1, period. They didn't care who it was. It didn't matter. And I, didn't really have an opinion one way or the other until I did that phase 1 with Jim McCamey. And then I'm like, oh my God, by then I was going pretty well and, kind of had some idea what was going on. I hadn't really figured out how to win, but, I was doing pretty well at national events and things like that. And I actually ended up winning my first couple of national events less than a month after that, because things became so much easier. I personally believe, I don't care how long you've been around, I think phase 1 is very important. And in fact, Pat Salerno, for quite a while, would take a phase 1 again every year. Usually we're good friends and stuff. We would, and we're both East Coast. He would figure out a place that I was teaching, because we get along very well that way, and he understands what I'm saying and stuff like that. There were even times that he arranged to we would do like not full schools really, and he would teach part of the day and then just jump in the car as a student for the one session. So, I think if you ask around, people will be of different opinions. Phase 2 is a lot more mental, I guess. the thing about phase one, when it's somebody like you, who people know and have a track record, things like that, if you show up at a phase one, every instructor is different. We're all people. Some people will see you at a phase one and kind of not maybe tell you something that they would tell. Like if you make X mistake, they might be a lot more willing to say that to a new person than they would say it to you. They kind of, sometimes people look at people and go, he knows what's going on. I don't have to tell him that. But I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily true. I do what I would recommend to anybody. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't care who you are. If you're wanting to go to a school and you haven't been through phase one ever, go to an evolution school and you haven't been through phase one ever, I don't care who you are, go to a phase one. And then the other thing is whoever you end up with as an instructor for those 2 sessions, you need to tell them, and this is where the arrogant might come in a little bit, but you need to tell them, I don't care what it is you see, you tell me, you be hard on me, treat me like anybody else. I mean, if you Kinch beat your instructor by 3 positions last year at Nationals. The instructor, it doesn't mean he can't teach you something, and I think you know that. I just don't know that everybody knows that. But the thing is, the instructor sometimes is a little gun-shy about coming off cocky, to a fast student. And that can be a little uncomfortable sometimes because, I get it. Sometimes it feels like you're an underling telling the CEO how to do his job. But sometimes I need to hear it.
You're exactly correct. I even got people that weren't instructors in my cars and in their cars, and let's say they weren't faster than me, they could still do something. I was like, hey, I didn't try that. I can go faster there. And on autocross, just tell me 1 or 2 places I can go faster, and it's well worth it. Well, none of us do everything. None of us do everything perfectly. Yes.
I think I can learn from almost anybody. I can learn something from almost anybody, and periodically I will be in a car with somebody, and literally we'll go through something. We'll be headed to an element, and I'm thinking in my brain, never going to make it. And somehow we manage to get through there, either just barely surviving or getting through there actually pretty fast. And me going, holy hell, how did they do that? To this day, that happens on occasion, with people. And then I kind of go, then I start thinking, even though I'm teaching them, I start going, how did they do that? So, and go, well, what can I learn? Can I try that? Maybe that'll work for me.
So yeah, give us the benefits you see of being an instructor. You can obviously learn from them. Does that help you very much? I mean, the fact you're sitting there riding and driving different cars?
Sure, yeah. Well, it can help and it can hurt. Most people who start instructing, it actually hurts them. For the simple matter that we get caught in what most of us refer to as school mode, where you get in the car and you're trying to do it. And I heard John, again, you guys, since I just listened to that podcast before you and I talked, sometimes I call it engineer brain in a way. Like you want to do things so perfectly and so methodically. You don't want to miss a mark. You don't want to, make a mistake. And you're so hung up on doing all that stuff so well that you forget to go fast. So that's the hardest thing. I mean, it caught me when I first started teaching. Is I found myself then driving events in this school mode. Think of it like a limp mode, in a way, right? I mean, it's pretty quick, right? But you're suddenly now driving at, 92%, right? Then instead of 99 or 101 or whatever it is, different people are different. I tend to think of myself kind of as a 101%er, and anybody who saw Nationals results this year would agree with me, I'm sure. But there's other people who are very, very fast, like my friend Jason Burns. I've co-driven with him. He won a national championship in 2006. Jason's what I would refer to as a 99%er. He doesn't make mistakes, but he also is not as aggressive. He doesn't push the car as much as I do. So 9 times out of 10, if the grip's good and it's not a real bumpy surface or something like that, I'm usually the faster one of the two of us. There are times he has completely ripped me to shreds, but it's usually when it's very slippery out or it's a very bumpy surface, because I usually beat him to the throttle. And he would admit all this too. It's not like I'm talking out of school. But there's definitely things I've learned watching him. And in that particular instance, what I learned is, look, anytime Jason's out pounding the living crap out of me, I'm overdoing something. I'm being too aggressive somewhere. Now I have to figure out where that is. So yeah, you learn a lot by teaching. So you got to stay out of school mode if you do teach. That's the hardest part. And eventually, I think we all manage to shake it, but it takes time. As far as, is it beneficial? Sure. I mean, it's like anything else. If you're a hitter, you play baseball. If you see a lot of pitchers and a lot of different motions and different kinds of curveballs and things like that, it becomes easier to hit a variety, of pitches from a variety of pitchers. If all you ever see are fastballs, great, you might be a great fastball hitter, but as soon as everybody else figures that out, you're nowhere. So, if you're great at slaloms, terrific, but if you're not good at other things, what good does it really do you? So you learn a lot by watching other people. And I tell students this all the time. I'm like, look, when you get out of this car and you go out there and work the course for the rest of this day, watch what people are doing. Watch the difference between what the instructor does versus the student. And don't just do that for one car or your co-driver. Do that for every car that goes by you. And you'll start to see a pattern form. You can tell this guy's going to blow, out of the end of the slalom going way too fast and not be able to make the skid pad corner. And I do that, when I work courses, which isn't all that often now, and I actually miss it a lot. I talk to myself. I watch people. I kind of do like a running commentary sometimes. And people, especially at smaller clubs who've maybe never met me or don't know anything about me or whatever, they'll look at me kind of strange sometimes, And to me, one of the best things about it is when I see a mistake coming and I'm like, he isn't going to make it. And, 3 seconds later, he doesn't make it. And these people kind of like look at me like, how the hell did you know that? Well, I'm not clairvoyant. I just saw, something in the attitude of the car, or I could hear they were on the throttle kind of too long or something. So you learn a lot and you go, well, if that guy does it and 10 other guys do it and only one guy does it right, it's a pretty common mistake. So when you drive the car, well, maybe you should be aware of that. So you don't make the same common mistake.
Yeah, I have to second that. My first several years, I didn't ride with people, but boy, did I watch them to the point of having a stopwatch while I was working course, especially in a little tight turnaround. Wow, David Fouth was faster, but he looked so slow there. So that was a big part.
Yeah, look how tight he was.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he didn't waste all the space, and I bet you his road speed was probably 5 miles an hour slower, and you thought he'd get killed, but he doesn't.
Yeah. And Bob Tennell, he did the same thing. I mean, it was amazing what I learned, whereas still to this day, like you said, I don't work courses much, but sometimes I do, or I go out there to watch just to see, and especially what you said, if you see some cars making the same mistake in the same spot, I always kind of star that in my memory going, okay, there's something there that's screwing people up, or they're not seeing. Mm-hmm. Make sure I'm looking and paying a lot of attention to that section of the course.
Yeah, there's another one I do. This might be a little bit of a segue, but there's this, at the risk of giving away maybe a SamStrano trade secret, I'll tell them. I jokingly refer to this as forensic autocrossing, like CSI Lincoln kind of thing. When I walk courses, I pay a lot of attention, especially if they've maybe already been run. Maybe if it's a pro course that, maybe you're walking in the afternoon or you're walking it before day 2 or something like that. Or even at nationals, if the course has been run, but you haven't run yet, you can learn an awful lot by looking at not just where people have been, that's pretty obvious, but if you look at how they kind of got there, like you can look at the ground and you can say, hey, there's a big bump there because the tire marks all of a sudden stop. There's black marks and then there aren't any. And then 3 feet later, there's a bunch of black marks from, like locked up inside brakes. Well, those stop for a reason because, especially in Lincoln, the pads aren't all equal. There's dips. So a lot of times I'm actually looking at stuff like that. I'm looking at, where people turn in early, basically on the backside of the corner. You can see those people then fighting on the backside of the corner to not run over cones. Those are always the really bad black marks on the outside where they have a ton of lock, stuffed in the car, driving through a push, trying not to run something over. So, just like watching cars, you can learn a lot from watching cars. You can also piece things together when there's not even a car on course just by looking, kind of looking around a little bit. And that's not real obvious to some people, I think, to the point that it absolutely drives me crazy. And it's a personal pet peeve of mine that everybody thinks not everybody, but it seems like most people think all the quote-unquote OPR problem at Lincoln is the seam sealer, between the concrete pads.
Yeah.
Drives me crazy. I remember, and I pointed it out again this year. It can't be the seam sealer because, A, you can walk over a crack and there's the seam sealer's in it. It didn't get yanked out and drug around like it did at, Salina and Topeka. It's there. And if that's what it was, it would get streaked, when you ran it over, it would get drugged onto the next, concrete block. And it doesn't. But there'll be these big chunks of rubber, clags, if you, are a David Hobbs fan or something. It's rubber. We run on really soft compound tires. The rubber chunks, it comes off. You drive over it with a sticky tire, you pick it up. It's not tar. It's not anything else. And people then say, well, why is it worse than Lincoln? Well, to me, it's pretty obvious why it's worse than Lincoln. Yeah, exactly. Lincoln's a fairly coarse surface. It's usually pretty damn hot. And where else do we run at any time during the year that sees that many cars and that much rubber go down, including like C-prepared rubber, big slicks?
Yeah, that many C-prepared or D-prepared all in one place.
Right. So I don't know. And that's the thing about it goes, that's why I was mentioning it, with regards to the, what I jokingly call the forensics. Sometimes people don't see what I think is pretty obvious. You look down, hey, the seam sealer is still here between all the cracks. Hey, there's a lot of cars here, running, and they're all on sticky tires, and there's more slicks, more cars running on slicks here than there is anywhere else all year. Well, it seems to make pretty obvious sense that you're picking up other people's rubber. It happens.
And here's something I really noticed. If you get offline, you come back with a heck of a lot more of that. And at Nationals, unless they just clean the course, if I'm not driving the tight line, I should just expect to have that stuff covering my tires. Yeah,
for sure. Absolutely. Right. And the thing is, some of that is how hard you drive as well. And it depends on the car. Like on the Civic, you probably get tons of it on the back of the Civic.
Yeah.
Especially on a hot day. For me, it's opposite of that. My rear tires are almost always pretty spotless because I drive, I've got power, and I kind of drive the rear of the car. My fronts don't even get clagged up too terribly badly compared to some other people's. But yeah, if you're offline, that's bad. But also, here's the thing: it kind of goes back to the beginning of this conversation, to what Tim told me about the slither and the squiggle. If the car's not moving around, you're not on the edge. The guys who tend to be at the top of the class have the car moving around. They tend to have less OPR problems, unless it's something like a Civic or, where the rear end is basically just, the rear tires are just kind of holding the back of the car up. Your cars move around too, at times, but it takes different kinds. It's not like you can just put your foot down and have the back of the car move.
No,
and you're not going to peel the rear.
The foot down
right.
fixes
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
It lines it back up.
Yeah.
Oh, something.
Yeah. So I don't know.
I really want to circle back to, you said that you took one of the phases of the schools and then you went out and started winning some events. That is amazing, and I think it points to the quality of instruction you were getting, and or just what I did so terribly when we had a advanced school. I took this advanced school, and like you'd said, some people were teaching me and telling me things that were not as good as I had been. Now, maybe they don't have as good of a car, et cetera, at the time, or one is prepped. But when I left that school, I was trying to fix so many things that I regressed for several months. Whereas somehow you got the right instruction, or you didn't need as much help, and you didn't have a list of 8 or 10 things you're going to fix, and you were actually able to be faster. I think some of that, once again, points to maybe the quality of instruction, and or maybe they warned you about that.
No, I think it was. I think it was kind of the quality of instruction because, and this is the thing, people can. In theory, anybody can teach anything to somebody who doesn't know as much, right? If I'm not an elementary school teacher, but I can add and subtract, for instance. Doesn't mean I can explain it to a 4-year-old in a way that is very clear to him. That's what I've always strived to do when I'm teaching people. There are a lot of people that know an awful lot about cars and autocrossing and stuff like that who are horrible teachers. the flip side of that is there's people who are great instructors who maybe aren't the fastest autocrossers. So, you have to find a way to connect with the student. And the thing is, we have a lot of students, right? I think I've done a pretty good job over the years. I can think of maybe 10 people, over 20 something years that it's just like nothing I said worked. It just wouldn't click with them. When that happens, you have to be humble enough to say, yeah, okay, I'm going to go get you, the other guy. And nowadays it's a little bit easier because the schools have kind of been reformatted in such a way. It used to just be 2 instructors, 12 people. So, at some point you were going to get the other instructor. Sometimes we would switch early, if we had a case that the other one couldn't crack. Now it's a little easier because I can kind of go to one of the other guys and go, hey, can we just switch students? It's not a personal thing. People pay money to be there. Good. I know. When I pay money for something, I want something from it. So these people pay good money to be at the school. They deserve to learn something. And if I'm not getting through to them, I'll try and get somebody who can. But I also try to pay. It's kind of like the whole reading a course, watching other people drive thing, right? As I'm talking to them, I'm kind of trying to, I guess, calculate or figure out what's going through their head. Is this making sense to them? I am the king of weak analogies, I guess. I can't ski. I see it. I watch it on TV. If you watch somebody go down a giant slalom, at the Olympics, there's a lot of likeness to what we do, especially when it comes to slaloms and stuff like that. Setting up a corner, wide, turning early, turning at the gate. So when you slide, you just slide right past it instead of being 10 feet off of it. So I'll talk to them, and if they're a skier, they tend to understand that analogy. So I go, great, just pretend you're skiing. Just, drive this course the same way you would drive a ski slope. And it sinks in. So you just got to find, try and hit on the right, the right thing for that, for that particular person. And honestly, the hardest ones, and this is the thing that sometimes upsets people, but it's not meant to. I can sometimes be a little hard on very analytical types, engineers, computer people, stuff like that. Not because I don't like them. It has nothing to do with that. But the problem is, we're trying to drive a big, heavy object as fast as we can around a very short course with a lot of things happening. So when I see that they're kind of overloading things, they're trying to be too specific and think about too many things and this cone and that cone and this one's over here, I kind of say to them on a basic level, well, I can tell usually when they're in an analytical kind of field. And I'll ask them, what do you do for a living? And they'll tell me. I'm like, oh, yeah, kind of figures. And it's always computer guy or engineer. And they look at you, and they're like, how did you know that? Well, one, it's kind of easy because, frankly, for some reason, autocrossing tends to attract people like that. I don't know why, but I'd say probably 75% of people are computer people or engineers that autocross. But, for computer people, I tell people all the time, well, look, it's like a computer. You can have the biggest, fastest computer in the world, but if you make it do, a lot of calculations all the time, it slows the computer down, right? And they go, well, yeah. Like, well, your brain's a computer, and you're thinking about way too much crap for 15 corners worth of stuff. And a lot of what autocrossing is just spatial awareness, right? You're in the car, you're looking at or into or through a corner or whatever. You just kind of basically need to know, I'm here and I need to go over there. You don't need to know there's 37 cones between you and that point. The only one that matters are the ones that keep you from going where you want to go. So when you kind of explain that to them, they usually start to get it. But it's very hard to get analytical people sometimes to turn their brain in a way off, a little more lizard brain. You just have to process what you're seeing. And if you're trying to process 13 other things other than what you're seeing or feeling in the car, it usually overwhelms people.
And that makes me think of it's looking ahead, but looking for the key cone or the key opening, maybe.
Yeah. Again, if Junior hears this, he might flip. Looking ahead has been around since I started. I mean, it's been around forever. And I don't want to say it's wrong. It's not. It's just that it's been used so much that I think it's kind of cliche at this point. I have never, ever, ever seen anybody autocross looking in the rearview mirror. So we all look ahead. But again, one of the things I'm kind of infamous for, I guess, is I'll kind of look around. And this works either way, whether it's a male student or a female student. I'll be talking to them, and I'm like, look, here's the thing about looking ahead. I see that you're looking. Problem is you're not seeing what's going on. You know, you get these real, like, big eyes, and you're not blinking, and you're just kind of, like, staring off into space. I said, you ever, like, for a guy, this is what I'll tell him, like, you ever have a fight with your wife? And he goes, of course, sure. And I'm like, she ever been, and like I said, this works the other way, too, so I don't want to get in trouble with the ladies out there. I'm like, well, she ever go on and on and on about something, and she's kind of yammering, and you just end up tuning her out? And they go, yeah. And I'm like, and then at some point she knows you're not listening to her, and she'll stop, and she goes, you're not listening, which is true. And they kind of, yeah. I'm like, so you usually answer her with something like, oh, I hear you. Well, yeah, you hear her. You hear whatever she's saying, but it's kind of going in one ear, not the other. You're not actually listening, right? And they go, yeah. I'm like, well, that's exactly what you're doing here. You're looking. You see cones, but you're not actually paying attention to what the cones are, telling you. That this corner gets tighter, for instance. Or, hey, if you're coming through a corner and you see the cones, spread out and get wider, that's a straightaway. I see that start to happen. That's telling me, well, go, dummy. And, it's just one of the kind of zillion dumb ways I've tried to kind of develop, trying to learn how to teach people. And that's the trick. Again, it's like the addition. I can add 2 + 2. It doesn't mean I can necessarily get through to a child trying to teach him 2 + 2.
So I think you're
saying,
I
had to find a way to do it.
you got to be looking ahead and saying, what is that leading me to, or what can I do because I'm seeing that opening or something tighter up there?
Yeah.
Which is totally what I think I'm doing. I'm at Nationals. Okay, there's a slot coming up over there. I've got to find that because I know there's a slot. So part of it is I have to have a clue what's coming up and to know I'm looking for it and to be able to gauge my speed to get through that based on whatever is next. So it's kind of almost looking ahead and giving that input into my pre-plan or my pre-memorized-ish course walk. More so than just looking ahead and not knowing why I'm looking ahead.
Right. That's the thing. Looking doesn't tell. Looking's kind of a generic thing, right? You stand on the side of the Grand Canyon and you kind of look into the Grand Canyon. If you don't know, that the Colorado River cut it and it's this deep, and and look at all these layers. If you don't know anything about it, you just stand there, you kind of go, "Wow, that's a big hole." So yeah, you have to have a reason for that. Honestly, to me, I've gotten kind of ahead of look. I don't tell anybody to look ahead anymore. I do it a different way. What I've realized is, and actually I learned this when I met Shelley. We were kind of talking about stuff like this early on, and not to tell her story. I know at some point, you've been trying to want to talk to her too, and maybe she'll regale you with this at some point. But I had only met her a couple times, and we were actually talking on the phone one night. And there was once she had her Lotus, and Lotuses are kind of infamous for quote-unquote ice mode problems. Of course, all cars, depending who you talk to, have an ice mode problem. Most cars don't. But the thing is, and she had been through schools, Shelley had autocrossed for, years before and then stopped. And, she had 2 national championships before she ever came back in like 2006 or something like that. Most people don't know that. But, she's always been pretty good. And when she came back to autocrossing, in the 2000s there, she took schools. And the course of our conversation was basically, I keep having this problem with the brakes. She's like, I either get it right or I blow past the corner, but there's no like rhyme or reason to why it happens. And I'm like, oh, sure there is. And she's like, what do you mean? Sure there. I mean, I had never seen her drive in person by this point. When we were in Nashville, I didn't know her, so I just wasn't paying attention. And I'm like, oh, I mean, that's pretty common. I said, it's very easy. What's going on? I said, you're not seeing the shape of the corner that's coming next. I said, my guess is you probably do what all my students do, and you're coming through an element, and the corner turn, the road turns left. There's a pointer cone or something there. And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, you tend to stare at the pointer cone, don't you? And she kind of thought about it for a minute, and she goes, well, yeah, I guess. And I'm like, terrific. I said, but the pointer cone only tells you that it's a left-hand corner. You don't have a clue if that corner is a kink or 90 degrees or 120 degrees or whatever. So if you don't know how tight the corner is, you don't know when to brake, let alone, when to get off the brake. So what I told her then was, you have to see the shape of the corner. So what I tell people personally now is very simply this. Forget the whole looking ahead thing. When you're driving, sure, you're looking ahead. But what I tell everybody is, as you're coming up to a corner, you have to look into the corner. Doesn't mean the whole way around it. Doesn't mean you're looking across, over your left shoulder before you ever turn the wheel. I said you have to look into it just to get a sense of, that's how tight the corner is. That gives you enough information to figure out kind of, what your speed needs to be. And as you start to enter the corner, you just keep looking around the rest of the way through it, and that gives you the second bit of information, which is, well, how long does this corner go on? And does it get bigger or does it get tighter or whatever? And then you can decide, when to let off the brake or when to go back to the throttle or something like that. So for me, it's all about shapes, which is actually something that, I learned from McCamey way back in 97. Kind of a hard thing to explain, but there's a maneuver on an old Phase 1 course. We don't always use it anymore. Sometimes we usually try to. But there's a circle, and the circle is a skid pad turn, and it's defined by 8 cones on the inside. And it's always 8 cones for a reason, because as you're coming down the slalom that precedes it, what Jim taught me to do was pick out the first one that sticks out the furthest, because that's easy to find. As soon as you see that one, as you're driving forward, you just look around the back and you count like number 2 and number 3. So that already starts to show you the radius of the corner. As you hit the brakes and you know roughly how tight the corner is, you just look across to what he called and what I call the second 3. You look for the second group of 3 cones in the corner, and you kind of click them off as you go, and you end up looking 90 degrees out of the car, right? You're looking through your, in this case, right side window. That tells you the rest of the corner. It's pretty easy. Some guys do it differently. Junior, for instance, tells you to look for the first cone like I do, but as you come out, instead of looking around the back to see the shape, he just looks across the skid pad. Well, that tells him the radius, and he's a carpenter, by trade, or used to be, so I guess he could see shapes in his head better than I can. Doesn't work for me. If I look from the cone on the far left of the skid pad to the cone on the far right, I want to drive straight to that second point. Right? So that's what I mean. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. You just have to find different ways that work, and you can ask 30 people, but you might get 35 different opinions, and yet you got to filter through, well, what actually works, what clicks, what makes sense in my brain.
Yeah, that's another good way. I've never heard that explained that way. I've been instructing people and say, look over there at the exit. And in my mind, I am drawing a path. Like I'm trying to see the path that I've seen in books that even changes colors for braking, blending braking, off the brakes, acceleration. I'm trying to see that line on the ground. But the only way I can see that line is what you're saying. I have to look into and then out of the turn. And then a lot of times I'm even thinking if I need to be tight coming out for a slalom or something, I need to have that memorized or see the next cone ahead to know, hey, you want to backside that cone. So you've got to bend that arc around to do that.
I'm the same way. It's part of the thing that helps me is I do a lot of something we do in a Phase 2 where, like I said, it's a more mental aspect. I'm looking, and when you try and teach this is where things really start to get sticky with students sometimes, because a lot of times we start to make them talk to us, which is kind of hard for them to do when they're driving sometimes. And then it's hysterical because the next thing they try to do is they start to try and point. Because a lot of times when we drive with one hand, and as we're talking to the student, we're pointing, at this or that or something like that. But I'm always constantly thinking, what's next, right? And when I say that, it's not what is the next thing in front of the car. I can see that. I should be looking. Like if I'm coming out of a corner, and I'm on the way out of a corner, and there's a slalom, I'm already looking at the beginning of the slalom, right? I don't have to then say to myself, oh, that's a slalom. But in my brain, I'm thinking, well, great, there's a slalom. What's next? Well, and that could be any number of things, right? Well, it's a long slalom, or it tightens, or it's only a 4-cone and there's a tight right-hander after it. So, I'm always driving around the course kind of going, what's next, what's next, what's next? So I've already, as soon as I say what's next to myself, I get a mental picture of the next element from the course walk. I'm not a big one for memorizing the course because I've never been very good at it. And if I drive things on memory, I tend to drive I do everything else on memory too. I start to drive like this concocted plan, I guess, I should brake there and go here and do all this other stuff instead of relying on what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling. That's how I have to drive. I have to be able to see where I'm going and then feel if the car will take me there, right? If the car's pushing, if I'm looking at a place and the car's pushing, I go, I can't get on the gas yet. If I see where I'm going and everything is going good, I can go, well, I need to get the hell out of here and I'll go. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Basically you're driving a car, and if you know where to drive the car, you can generally do it pretty well. That's probably the hardest thing for people, is figuring it out. And that's the toughest part about autocrossing, right? The courses always change. It's not like a road course where you have, asphalt and grass or asphalt and dirt or whatever it is. It's pretty easy to find your way around a road course that might have 10 or 12 turns in 2 miles. It's pretty obvious where the road goes. It's not so obvious where the road goes for us. So you have to spend a lot of time trying to find it, and you have to do it as quick as as quick as humanly possible without doing something strange. Like I see people try and look. This goes back to the whole look ahead being cliche thing. I see people try and look so far ahead that they literally will cut things out of their vision between the car and where they want to go.
That's when I say scan. So I scan ahead, I cheat ahead, and then I look back where I'm at. And I'll find myself correcting to not hit the cone I'm about to come up to because I've scanned ahead to give my brain hopefully time to figure out that spatial awareness. And then I'm like, oh, shoot, what's right in front of me now?
Right. And here's the thing. If you were a student of mine, and I'll tell you this right now, knowing your track record and everything like that, I'd sit in the car and I'm like, don't do that. And you'd probably look, and other instructors would probably be like, no, it's fine. I do the same thing. I know Mike, Jr. scans ahead. I can't do it. Whether it's because I'm blind or I have an astigmatism in both eyes, or I don't know what the reason actually is, but I think it takes, I can't remember the exact number. I think it's something like it takes us about a second to look at something and focus on it. So for me, if I'm looking through a corner and then I try to scan further ahead and then scan back, that could take 2 seconds worth of time to look and look back. And the thing is, if you manage to look a long way ahead, that's great, unless you've lost your path in between where you are and where you're going.
Yep.
Then you have to reacquire that, and your brain has to figure all that out. You'll scan ahead, and I almost guarantee you, matter of fact, you just said it, that when you look back, you have to make a correction and not hit something between you and that point, right?
Well, I usually have time to do that. So I'm the nut that I do look in the side mirror and rear view, but I'm noticing if cones are not in their boxes as I'm driving past them because I may cheat ahead for just a split. I think it's a split second, and I'm coming back and I'm evaluating what the cone's doing compared to the box, and then I'm yelling at the course workers and pointing at the cone.
Sure.
So I would love to have something on me that shows, or all of us, I'd love to see, hey, where are my eyes really looking for how long? That, if we could have that technology and get that on our heads, I would love to see what you really do. Because when you said you look up to the slalom and say, what's next? I think when you say what's next, you're probably cheating ahead. At some point, I think there's a compromise between what we're saying and what we're doing. I think you look further ahead than you think, and I probably don't look as far ahead as I think.
No, I know I do. The thing is, though, I can guarantee this. I don't look back. The only time I look back, if my eyes move up, and I'll tell students this all the time.
Oh, wow.
If my eyes look up, if I ever drop my eyes back down, that's a problem. Because basically, automatically, you're shortening. The whole idea of looking ahead, quote unquote, is to give yourself more time, right, to figure out things quicker and have more time to adjust to them. So the flip side of that is, if your eyes ever drop back toward the hood of the car, guess what? You're doing exactly the opposite of that. You've helped yourself a little bit because now you have an idea of what's up. The thing is, I get that idea in a more mental. I look plenty far ahead. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't look ahead. I do, tons. The thing is, I don't look back. And you can ask anybody who I've had through a school probably, I call it cheating. I call it cheating in one way because you're kind of, it's like when you're cheating on a test. Like, you're in school and you're kind of like looking sideways at the guy's paper beside you. It's cheating. Or I call it the more joking way I describe it to people is I call it eye pinball. And they kind of look at me funny. And I'm like, yeah, it's like a pinball and it's on the bumpers, and the ball is bouncing back and forth like crazy. I see people's eyes do that a lot. They're like looking up, down, left, right. It's all over the place. I'm like, you don't need to do it. Blink. Just look. You're here and you want to go there. It's pretty much that simple. As long as you keep doing that through the course.
I'm pretty sure I turn my whole head sometimes and look across and then
Sure.
turn my head back and go, okay, this is a big, huge sweeper. I'm going way over there. I remember Kevin Winslow telling me, hey, your head was all the way out. You were looking so far ahead. So it's just amazing how there's so many different ways to slice the same pie. Still, it's all about, at least I think I heard you basically saying, you have to get to the level of adhesion. And what you're leading up to there is every run is different also in where you're at on the course sometimes. I always say, I'm here. Where do I want to be? What can I do from here to be the fastest for the rest of the course or the next section?
Right. Sure. I mean, that's the thing. In the end, we're in a car. It's got 4 tires on the ground. It's dumb, right? Well, some of the cars now are getting pretty smart. But and you can see that, by the way, some of the newer cars, you can actually watch the car like fix, errors in process of happening, which kind of infuriates me, but what can you do? But yeah, and when Gene, was really active in McCamey school before, they sold it off, that was one of her big things. And, God love her, sometimes Gene's a little hard to follow, but one thing she was always right on about is we don't care if you left foot brake or you right foot brake or you drive with one hand or something like that. And for the most part, that's true. I'm a big believer in that because the car doesn't know. It doesn't care. That's why I right foot brake. There's some people that think I'm crazy and there's no way you can ever win anything by right foot braking. But there's a whole list of people that are really fast right foot brakers. There's a whole list of people that are really fast left foot brakers.
But do you think there's more right footers that have won? I think there's more to the right foot than left foot.
Probably only because I think on the whole, we all learn to drive a car right foot braking, right? Especially if it's a stick shift car. Just from the time we were 14 or 15 or 16, right? Long before we ever started autocrossing. So we all have a kind of a big leg up, so to speak, by using our right foot. Left footing's hard. I mean, I've thought about it years back, going back to when Tim and I talked. When I was first starting this stupid sport, I remember having this conversation, and it kind of led to a car setup discussion, but it was the whole theory versus reality thing. Tim wanted to learn how to left foot brake because it got rid of the lag time between the pedals, and he also felt that he wanted a 100% car, whatever theoretical thing that actually is, right? And he would learn to drive it. I've always been the other way. I guess I'm more conservative that way. I looked at it and went, well, look, I haven't been autocrossing in a long time, but I'm now 23 years old, so I've been driving since I was 16, right? So I have, 7 years of experience using this foot on this pedal and moving it back and forth between the pedals and, stuff like that. So if I start the left foot brake, it's a whole relearning process, right? It'd probably take you – generally, I've heard, and I would guess it's true, I can't say otherwise, that you have to do it for a solid year to get, basically as proficient at it as you would be right foot braking. And I thought about it for a long time and went, do I want to give up a year for something that I'm not really sure is ultimately faster? For instance, Rubens Barrichello, before, well, he still races, but before he retired from Formula One, he was the only guy left in Formula One who right foot broke. He was quick. Was he Michael Schumacher? No, but he also beat Schumacher heads up more than once. Including some big fiasco in Austria one year where they made him pull over to let Schumacher by. And that's the thing. I mean, most of those guys left foot brake because they came up through go-karts. Makes sense. I get it. The thing with me from an instructing point of view is very simply this. I see more people make more, mistakes, I guess, left foot braking because I think, they just don't have the seat time basically doing it. But B, it's easier to use it as a crutch. When your right foot is over the gas pedal and your left foot's hovering over the brake pedal, I think it's very easy to tap the brake, for instance, like a chicken brake, versus like just maybe lifting off the throttle for a second and going back down, like for a fast kink on a course. It's like a safety mechanism. I get it. I mean, that said, there's plenty of left foot breakers that are ballistically fast, but they know kind of what they can get away with and when they should get away with it, and they don't use it like a crutch. Because in the end, and this goes back to, this is a long way back to what Gene said about the car not knowing what's going on. You can't bend the laws of physics, right? I don't care if you left foot brake. If you left foot brake and you're going through the middle of a corner and you have your feet pounded on both pedals, the car's not going to turn. It doesn't care which foot is doing what. You're just going to ask too much of the front tires, and it ain't going to happen. And then sometimes, like, the conversation we had about the GT3, it's a lot easier to stay on the brake pedal a little bit longer, kind of thing. And sometimes, the car isn't going to be as lively as it would be if your left foot wasn't on, dragging the brake pedal in those instances. So there's pros and cons to it. And yeah, I mean, I made a pretty conscious decision a long time ago not to. I'm not going to say it's ever right. About 3 or 4 times, I think, every year, like at one particular corner on a course, I kind of go, damn it, I wish I knew how to left foot brake, because I think it would have helped me right there. But, it's very rare. It's like, 99.78% of the time, it's never an issue.
Yeah, that has me thinking that if I can become the left and sometimes right foot braker, I think I would only drag them on purpose in slaloms at times where I'm like a little too hairy. That's the biggest benefit, I think, in the front wheel drive cars I've driven, that if you do something a little bit too late, you're going to spin or lose it big enough that you're done. That's where I think I like the left foot braking. And I only started doing it because I was driving a turbo Audi S4, that it really seemed to help to brake and be able to add some gas back in there and have some boost coming out. That's the whole reason I even do it. Yet in the front wheel drive Civics, it feels like it is a safety valve that seems to help me be able to attack. At least I think I'm attacking.
Sure. Well, and that's the thing. The thing is, if you can do, I guess it's like anything, right? If you can do both proficiently, and you realize, it helps you. If you don't solely just left foot brake, but sometimes you go back and forth, you can realize. And again, I'm aware of what left foot braking can get you sometimes, right? I get it. I've made my decision, and that's that's that. It's not. I mean, if I drive a go-kart, as funny as that picture might be to some people, I mean, I left foot brake and I don't kill myself. But the brake pedal on a car, to me, I'm not comfortable doing it. I have to pull my leg way far over. All of a sudden, I'm not bracing myself, so I don't feel what the car's doing as well. I mean, there's a lot of reasons I've decided not to, but it's personal. I don't care. That's
a good point I hadn't thought of. When I was doing that, I was like, wow, I'm really bracing the seat now because I'm not smart enough to get a seat that holds me. But as you just said, if you're more planted, makes me think about go-karting. They say you want to stiffen the whole chassis when you're driving those things by pushing back. That's very interesting. The more planted you are, the more feel you're going to get. You may have just clued me into the biggest reason I claim not to feel much of anything in a car, unless it's really
that doesn't
loose.
Surprise me. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that blows me away about Daddy-O, right? He's built like you, right? He's tall and lanky, and he doesn't, even in his Corvette, he doesn't wear a lap belt, like a 3-inch lap belt. The Corvette has a seatbelt that'll ratchet tight. He doesn't even do that. He puts the seatbelt on click like any normal car, and that's that. And he left foot brakes constantly. He never doesn't left foot brake. So I'm like going, well, how the hell do you stay in place? You're a pipe cleaner, basically. At least me, I'm big, right? I kind of get wedged between the door and the console a little bit, but I still cram my left foot on the dead pedal when I'm not shifting. And it just it's one of those things that just makes me scratch my head and go, I don't understand how you can do that and tell what the hell is going on. Thing is, I think sometimes, I don't know, he manages to adapt to it. But if you actually watch his videos, you'll actually see sometimes, you can see where he's physically hanging onto the wheel.
Oh, I do. I pull my wheel down in the Civic. I'm like, oh, there it went. It went down 2 inches again. I've never thought, hey, can I really tighten that all the way up there? Or is there some way to make it permanent? But yeah, I'm hanging on the wheel and leaning from one side of the seat to the other and going, why are my legs bruised? And they go, well, it's that silly seat you have. I'm like, oh gosh. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry.
But the thing is, again, this is a feel sport, right? When the car moves, the only way it moves is either see it happening with your eyes, or you feel it happening with your ass, right? So, and I guess in my world, right, if my ass is, I learned this very early on when the very first time I wore a harness. It was before I was smart enough to realize I could just wear a lap belt, but because I like my shoulders kind of free when I'm autocrossing. But the very first time, and this is in my Z car with a stock piece of crap seat, the first time I wore basically a lap belt and wore it tight, I couldn't believe what it did. I mean, from one event to the next, I went markedly faster to the people in front of me.
Well, explain
like
what a lap belt is for us.
Oh, just a lap belt part of like a racing harness.
Oh, just the bottom half
belt
of it
that you can make tight. Yeah. I mean, you can wear a harness too. That just depends on the seat and stuff like that. But I kind of hunch forward when I autocross, so I don't really like my shoulders being restricted that way.
We had something back in the Integra that would just go in the bottom half and click it down really tight. You're making me remember that now. I should at least have that.
Sure. The Corvette, yeah, like the newer, like the C6 like ours, it kind of does the same thing. You let the seatbelt, you pull it out far enough, it goes clink, and when you let it back, it ratchets, and you can pull up on the shoulder belt and make the lap belt really tight.
And Matthew Braun did
still have a racing lap.
Matthew Braun pulled the seatbelt up top and smacked it like karate chopped it, and it locked. I've tried that several times since then. And I haven't pulled that off again.
His belts are different. Not to not bore you with Corvette crap, but the C5s have dual reel seat belts. There's a reel on the shoulder belt. There's a reel on the lap belt. And where it buckles in, right, each does its own thing. So basically what he's doing is he's yanking it real fast to latch it like what would happen in an accident. And then he kind of like leans into it so it stays tight. My car is different. My car has just one single reel on the bottom, and the seatbelt kind of like slides through the latch. So the C6s are different. You latch it, you pull the shoulder belt out, you just pull it the whole way out, literally, till you get to the end of the reel. But it clinks, and as you feed it back, you can hear ratcheting. And then you yank up on the shoulder belt really hard, and it tightens the lap belt, and it stays tight. It basically ratchets tight. So, there's all kinds of tricks. There's the thing that they used to sell. I think they still sell it. The CG lock.
Yeah, that's what it was. There you go.
Times. Yeah. It just depends on your car. Some like that thing, like a CG lock, would work in my car if I needed it. It won't work in Matthew's car because of the way the seat belts are set up.
Yeah.
It's really kind of silly. It's one of those specific things. But long story short, for me, anything you can do to plant yourself in that seat hard, the better off you are. Because think about it, when you're driving the car fast, if you're moving around in the seat, how do you really know what's you moving versus what's the car moving?
We're a different kind of alien. It's a different kind of alien feel. No, I don't have a clue. You're right. It's a disadvantage.
That's why I tell people all the time. I'm like, I'm no alien. Anybody who's seen me drive early on in my career would know that. I am definitely one of the learned people, not one of the gifted people.
And that's what's been fun on this podcast, talking to different people about how much time and effort they put in and how much coaching they got and the number of runs they put in before it really started clicking. It's amazing what has things clicking for different people, like you're saying, alien versus, hey, I really tried it, I wasn't good at it, I kept trying, I figured it out.
Yeah. No, I mean, you get people who you can tell that they have some, modicum of talent, to do this, and I see them periodically. They might not be the fastest people, but if I see them, I definitely try and encourage them and tell them, hey, don't, just hang in there. If you can do something with your car to help it, do it. Because I've been where you are. The flip side, and as anti-politically correct as this may be, there's some people that should take up bird watching, right? They maybe just don't have the hand-eye coordination to do this very well. If they enjoy it, great. I'm not going to tell them not to autocross or something like that. But the hardest thing for me, I think, when I'm teaching is just, when you get somebody who's trying just so hard and not really getting anywhere, and they come back time and time and time again, to me it's a little bit heartbreaking sometimes because I want to help them so much, but luckily there's not that many people that are like that. And I'd say the most frustrating part, not the saddest part, but the most frustrating part is when you make a breakthrough with somebody, but it doesn't stick. The next time you see, like something happened. All of a sudden they make, a great run, and they're good the rest of the day, and then they just never get it back. And I must admit, I can't explain why that happens sometimes. I'll be in the car with them, and I'm like, you got it. And I tell them, and they have a big smile on their face, and I get out of the car, and they're still running really well, and it's awesome. And then, whether it's the next day or a week later or a month later or whatever, it just kind of disappears into the ether, and it just doesn't come back. I don't know what to tell those people, because they come to you and ask you, well, what can I do? And I'm like, I don't know because whatever you were doing, what we were doing at the end of the school was working. Are you doing those things that we discussed? Yes. And then I'm kind of like, I have to be honest with them. I'm like, I wish I could help. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do
trust
they
me.
truly know what they fixed, or did the car change, or did a bad habit creep back in, and they think they're thinking the right thing, but they're not doing it?
Right. Well, you got to be. The hardest thing is, we're our own best critic. So I'm probably one of those. I'm not probably one of those. I'm definitely one of those glass half full kind of people. I'm just a pessimist. If something goes wrong, I look at myself. I look at this. I think the worst. Yeah, I mean, there could have been something gone wrong with the car. Who knows? I don't know. So that's why I'm very big on kind of like going through the motions. What's the car telling you, kind of thing. Is the car happy? Is the car fighting you? If the car's fighting you, you're making a mistake. That kind of thing. But if they're not to a level, and this is the tough part, you don't have to be Superman to set up a car decently or drive a car pretty decently or anything like that. But you have to be able to. This is the hardest thing. You have to make sure people know that their driving has to be consistent. It doesn't have to be great. I mean, it's better, sure, if you're a really good driver. But whatever you do, if you consistently make the same mistake, well, okay, great, we can kind of set the car up around that. But if your driving is all over the map and you do this one time and this the other time and something different on your third run, how do you set up a car? You have to have some basis, to build from.
Huh. So
and that's the thing. Just
that might lead us to being consistent. What is your thoughts when this comes maybe the mental? You make a run. When you come back to, what is your process? Do you stop and go, oh, I had one mistake there, I need to watch video? What do you do in between runs mentally? Since you're pretty consistent, what do you do, or what do you think about changing in between?
I don't know. It's changed over the years, to be honest with you, and it sometimes changes. I don't want to say it. It doesn't change event to event, but it's pretty. One thing I know about myself is it's very rare for me to not be smack on the pace, like really fast right out of the box. It happens sometimes, and when it does, that probably throws me for a bigger loop than anything. What I have learned is this. Again, it kind of goes back to the overthinking things. Going back about 5 or 6 years now, when Shelly and I kind of started dating, she flew out to my place once, and she had never driven a Z06 or ridden in a Z06 or anything like that. But we went to an event, and we were trading back and forth. It was cold and kind of nasty, but I think that's what sold her on buying one, because I set the course up and had a really fast run up into a fast slalom. And as we got there, I could see her like kind of push back into the seat because she's used to an Elise, and I could just tell she knew there was no way we were going to make that slalom. And we made it, and she's like, "Oh my God, I didn't think these could do that." And then stuff like that. Well, then we were switching back and forth, and at one point I made a mistake on the course, and we had been talking about driving stuff in general and also the cars, and we came back from the run. She goes, "Well, what did you do wrong, in general?" And I said, "Well, I goofed that up and this up." And I never say that to myself. And when I went out for my next run, somewhere in the back of my brain, I guess I had remembered I had said that. And all of a sudden I got to those two places, and I did those things right, but the rest of the run sucked because I was too focused. I was too focused on, fixing those two things. So it's hard to explain. I'm kind of, I just kind of drive. And I drive what I see. I drive what I feel, and if I make an error, it's usually pretty apparent to me that I've done it, and I go, oop. Sometimes even when I'm driving, I'm like, well, screw that up, dumbass, whatever, and I go back to paddock, and especially with a co-driver, I usually don't have a lot of time to think about too much stuff. But what I've noticed about myself is the more I harp on something, the more I think about it, the worse things get. Right? So you just got to kind of like go, yep, all right. I guess it's like a major league hitter probably. Okay, I struck out. Big deal. If I go to the plate next time going, I struck out, you put a lot of pressure on yourself, and it probably isn't going to do you any good, worrying about it.
No, I like that.
Anyway, be aware.
You're one of the first people I've heard say that, not to harp on the negatives. That I really like that thought process instead of, I used to, and I don't do it as much, I'd come back, what 2 things do I need to fix? Okay, now more so maybe I need to pay attention over there. Something surprised me maybe.
Yes, well, that's the thing. If anything surprises me, that's a big problem. So I don't get surprised. I mean, that's the thing. I see stuff coming. I mean, years ago I did. Years ago I used to walk courses and go, I'm going to break right there. And it took me a long time to figure out, well, guess what, dummy? You can't always break right there because maybe you got a better run, on your second run than you did your first run, and now that break point doesn't work. So that's when I learned I never think about where I brake or gas because, it's a preconceived notion. It's not reality, right? The reality is what is actually happening at this particular moment and what is happening under my butt.
Yeah, once again, where am I at? Where am I going? So true what you said. I used to do the same thing, like, I'm supposed to memorize this course, and I should brake here. And I would brake there for no apparent reason. And then it really hit me what you just said. The next run, you might get a better run at it. Well, I was applying these things to pro solos. Guess what, goofball? Your braking zone? I used to think I'm going to brake later and later and later. Out of pro solo, I finally realized a few years ago, you are probably going to need to brake sooner and sooner and sooner because you're making 12 runs. You're going faster, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Right. And in a way that kind of might, again, the left foot braking makes it easier for you to go, well, I think I could brake later. I probably couldn't do that because I still have the lag time between the pedals.
That's interesting. Yeah, Tom Berry, it was interesting with him. He drove with me when I picked up Wong's Civic probably 2 years ago now. And he goes, yeah, we both drive the car with the nose or like really aggressive. He goes, but the data keeps showing me that they keep coming and saying, Dad, don't do that. That's not how you should be driving. It'll be faster the other way. But it's also, I think, something with left foot brakers because almost every person at left foot brakes that I interview, especially in a Civic, they seem to really hit the brakes late and very, very aggressively.
Yeah. I mean, and here's the funny part about that. You mentioned way back, earlier about driving an S4, and that's where you started a left foot brake.
Yeah.
I have driven a number of turbo cars, so not many people know that, but I spent all of 2000 in an RX-7 twin turbo in super stock. And there was a big kerfluffle with Kumho tires that year and changing carbon black suppliers, and all of a sudden they went slow and all this other kind of crap. But I was pretty good in the car. I went to Meridian and beat Eric Strelnick's, and at Nationals that year I was fourth. Eric was third. I was fourth. I was the first guy on Kumho's. The next guy was ninth. And I was running on a set that had like 90 runs on them and recorded because they were faster than the quote-unquote new stuff. And I figured that out by testing. Nobody else did. So that kind of goes back to that part of the story. But the thing with an RX-7, I mean, I don't know if you've ever driven one or not, but they're sequential twin turbo, and of course they're a rotary, so they're not exactly over-blessed for torque. And the way they make power is really wacky. Like if you ever find a dyno curve off of one, it looks like an EKG, like a pulse, the power, it goes up, and then it actually drops. And then it spikes and then drops back again to a level higher than it would, had been on the first turbo. I thought to myself, maybe this is where I need to learn how to left foot brake. But problem was, it was an R1 car, so it had plenty of headroom because there was no sunroof. The sunroof cars didn't. But there's no tilt steering, and I'm a pretty big guy. How Lee Picone ever drove that car, I'll never know. But I had to learn how to shuffle steer in that car. I never shuffle steer before either. I still am not a big proponent of it, especially in rear-wheel drive, powerful rear drive cars. But my legs were so crammed up in that car that, the steering wheel would rub my legs, and I would turn without shuffle steering and literally would end up punching myself in the leg above the kneecap. So I'm like, well, I can't move my legs around. I can't, even if I wanted to left foot brake this thing, I can't. Jeff Altenberg, who very good autocrosser, a zillion national championships and stuff, before he went road racing, he had the RX-7 first in late '92. He's a right foot braker. He won. He was fast. And what I learned was, you don't have to left foot brake, but what you do have to do is you have to be able to get back to the gas early, which means you can't make a mistake going into the corner. If you're in too fast, you're screwed because you can't get back to the throttle to have it, start to build boost. And I had to learn, and again, this is one of these things that's different with every car, and I had to learn that you don't drive it like a typical high-powered rear-wheel drive car. If I took the Corvette, turned the wheel, got the car set, and then slammed my foot to the floor, it would kill me in an instant. The RX-7, it turns out, I actually, that's what you did, but that's what I did anyway. I basically whacked it to the floor, and then I would actually modulate the throttle by immediately knowing I had to start to lift up some amount.
Uh-huh.
I don't drive any other car that way. I mean, not to the floor anyway. Of course, you always feather the throttle. But I was trying to play a game with not lifting enough where it would dump boost. And it worked. But it was the most frustrating year I spent ever, I think, autocrossing. It just wasn't fun for me. I didn't fit in the car very well. It was laggy. There was runs that I made that I thought were crappy, and they were fast. There were ones I made that I thought were ballistic and were shitty. And I'm like, I just don't get along with this car. And in one stretch through that year, it broke 4 weeks in a row. Shocking that enough DRX-7 broke that often. But every time it did, luckily there were some very nice people who still race, Jeff and Roberta Wetzel. They had a C4 Grand Sport at the time, and they let me jump into it every time. And every time I jumped into it, I would always go faster than I went in the RX-7. Every single time. At which point I kind of went, yeah, I'm just better with with these cars, with V8s, I guess. But yeah, there's ways around it. Like I said, the car doesn't know, what's up. And sure, using your left foot brake to spool a turbo car is great in theory. Problem is, if you're applying power while you're on the brakes, something's got to give. And the tires only have so much traction. And if you're still on the brakes, to me, that means you're still turning. And that's probably the last place you should be on the brakes, is somewhere in the middle end of the, middle phase of the corner. If it's a big increasing radius corner with a long straightaway after, yeah, okay, I get it. Otherwise, I'd like to, I'd try and do it different ways. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Like I said,
that you were shuffle steering there. I shuffle steer, and people are like, what are you doing? And I'm always looking at people that cross their arms. But I was driving a D-stock Integra forever. And once again, the wheel was huge. And I believe maybe somebody taught me early on, so I just shuffle steer. That's just what I do. But it all comes back to that first car. And the left foot braking's all because of that. And what you said is so true. Also, I would brake early in that S4 big heavy car. I said, I have to straight line brake. So that even though I was left foot braking, I had to get back on that gas like 1.5 to 2 seconds before I needed that throttle. And then as soon as it started coming on in the turn, you had to start lifting like you were just saying. You had to get off of that.
Right.
I have to come back to the RX-7s. I have never driven one, although prices seem pretty cheap right now. But I really thought, I think they went to A stock maybe, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And I called John Ames. I said, hey, you had one of these. Should I get one? At the end of the hour-long conversation, he goes, well, yeah, if you can find one with a warranty, you should get one. But he basically, I was like, what? Yeah, they're 10 years old or whatever, or 20. He's like, yeah, exactly. You should not get one of those. He said with that car, it was so weird, everybody thought, oh, that's the car you have to have. But he said run to run, it was so different because you had gobs of power when the engine was cold, but the tires were cold. And he goes, it totally swapped by the end. So it was amazing that he talked to me for an hour about those cars and how kind of weird they are.
Yeah, they are. They're something special, that's for sure. I mean, back then I hadn't won anything at that point, and I think when I showed up, people in my class, I was competitive, and nobody was scared of me or anything like that. Nobody should be scared of me now, right? I'm a big teddy bear, but they were so hard to drive. I would take it. I can't say any Corvette, but thinking back on it now, I can't think of very many C4 Corvettes that I wouldn't have chosen over that car. It wasn't mine. I was asked to drive it by the car owner, and in retrospect, for many reasons, I went, yeah, that's a year I just shouldn't have. To play with the car, here and there, it was kind of fun to jump into as like a novelty, to feel that boost spike and stuff like that. But it wore thin pretty fast.
So
it was all pretty on the outside, and when you saw what was inside, you're kind of like, ooh, that's not a pretty person.
Like, this is a little complicated, a little extra baggage here. So all these Corvettes you've had, I mean, also done Mustangs, so you go back and forth. I keep hearing
Camaros,
how great
yep.
C5 Corvettes are. I've only driven one once, but I keep thinking, everybody, what are your thoughts on the different Corvettes, and does a C5 stick out as a great
Are we talking Z06s?
Yes.
Are we talking super stock ones?
Yeah, Z06, sorry. Yeah.
Or A Street, yeah. This I'll get in trouble for. I think somebody, because I like I said, the thing about me is I can't tell a lie, even if I try. I just wear my heart on the sleeve. I have a C6 Z06. It's my second one. I had a C6 Grand Sport. I did have a fixed roof coupe, C5, for a while. I've driven lots, extensively. Here's the thing. When I tell people the C5 Z06 is the better car, they think I'm full of crap. And I'm telling them a fib because I don't own one. And I shrug and go, well, you asked my opinion. I'm telling you. And here's the thing. It's not that I just told you that. I backed it up. Here are the reasons why. And I'll keep this as brief as I can. The C5 Z06 is narrower than a C6, significantly, about 3 inches. It's got a shorter wheelbase. It has the same width front wheel, 9.5. It's got a 10.5-inch rear wheel, where my car has a 12. It's got 12% shorter gearing than my Z06. The Grand Sport actually has the same gearbox, right? So that's why I actually had a Grand Sport as well for a while, trying to get that gearing out of it. So it's smaller. It's not much lighter. It's very marginal, but it's smaller, it's shorter. It's got a better balance on front to rear, rim width. Like if I told you that you were going to build an autocross car from a clean sheet of paper, you would probably take a car that had a 1-inch discrepancy on front to rear rims than a 2.5-inch discrepancy.
Oh.
For balance reasons. You've ridden in them now, like that day at Spring Nationals you rode with Matthew and I. They're just very different. The thing is about a C5, and again, I'm very blunt about this, having owned one, and I admire them greatly. And you cannot find a cheaper, basically supercar bargain in the world. I mean, you can buy a C5 Z06 for less than $20,000. That's in decent shape. You find a gorgeous one for 23 or 24. It's the bargain of the century. But, it's got the same radio my 97 GMC truck had. The seats in all Corvettes aren't the greatest, but they really suck in the C5. The C6 is nicer. My C6 has heated seats. If I'm buying an autocross-only car, and it's a Corvette, it's a C5 Z06, without doubt. This year at the Pro Finale is a very classic, I guess, example of it. I was second. I lost to Brian Peters by, 10th, 0.107, I think it ended up being. The course had, a 6-cone slalom going out and a 5-cone slalom coming back. And if you remember, it had kind of fairly tight corners, maybe 2/3 of the way through. So when you think about it, I've got a longer wheelbase, a wider car. I've got gearing. My second gear goes to 90, 91. Okay. I have to go. People go, well, it's a Z06 that has 500 horsepower, and a C5 Z06 has 400 horsepower. That's a big difference. Sure, it's a big difference, except my gearbox gearing is 12% taller, plus my rear tire is a bunch taller. And for me to get to peak torque, which is not nearly 100 foot-pounds higher than the C5, it's 70 foot-pounds higher than the C5. But to get there, I have to be going 61 miles an hour in second gear just to get to my peak torque. I have to be going something like 79 or 80 or something like that to get to where my car actually makes 500 horsepower. People have done thrust curves. Vivek Goel has done thrust curves on the car. And sure, in first gear, my car will murder a C5 Z06. Problem is, it's undrivable pretty much anywhere at the top of first gear. But in second gear, until we are going 55 miles an hour or faster, the C5 is the quicker car. And if you think about autocross speeds, think about the Pro Finale as an example. How often were we going faster than that? Not very. I drove, and I will tell this, I didn't win. I'm fine with not winning. I think if you talk to Brian, he would tell you, I was completely okay with it. I kind of fought to get a cone taken off my right side run because it wasn't mine, and the course workers admitted it wasn't mine and all that stuff. And Brian was very cool about it, and we talked, and, I explained it. And in the end, through all kinds of strangeness, I ended up second overall for the year because of the way the points worked out in overall. So, yeah, I made the fight, but I drove my ass off. I can't think of probably a Pro Finale. I think I drove better, and I couldn't get there. I was close, and if anybody makes a snide comment to me about how I lost to Brian Peters by 1/10 of a second, I'm going to go, yeah, well, Brian doesn't suck, clearly, and Brian and I had a hell of a battle early in the year in A Street out here at the El Toro Pro that I managed to come out on top of. But, he beat me at Spring Nationals. He's a good driver. There's no shame in losing to Brian Peters. But I couldn't have done anything else. And I had a number of people walk up to me going, you just got killed on the slaloms. The car's wider and longer. You just can't slalom it. And 1/10 of a second's a very small amount of time. So I'm like, well, whatever. I did all I could do. And I think I went into Nationals just to prove, I guess, how mental stuff is important with the sport. I've got a pretty good list of accomplishments, I guess, in the sport. And I think, a lot of people would put me in pretty good company, as far as other drivers. I didn't have a conscious thought about, oh my God, I have to drive my ass off to do this. I didn't. I was fine, and okay, whatever happens, happens. My times were very competitive. If you managed to ignore the cone problems that, resulted on every run, I think I would have ended up second for Nationals too. I couldn't catch Brian. I don't think I ever ran the scratch time Brian ran on either course. Don't have any excuse for that on the plain, the East course, the one closer to the runway. There was nothing wrong with that course for my car. We had the one showcase turn that was kind of tight, but it's a give take. The other course was definitely not, except for the finish, was not what I would call very CO6 friendly. And by that time, I had coned out the first day and I coned out the first run. And I think after I hit the first cone on day 2, mentally I just went, screw it. I've got a boatload of second and thirds over the years. And then I just went, which is funny to think about it now because I'm like, I know I don't want that to come out wrong. I know a lot of people would give, some body part to be second in SSR. But I'm just kind of like, I think somewhere along the way I just like, screw it. and I just said, just drive as hard as you can because the last thing I wanted to do was lay up. It doesn't benefit me. I don't, if I had never had a second place before or never had a championship before, or something like that. But, and ironically, in the end, I had a lot of people come up to me and go, that was awesome. And I'm like, what? Screwing up Nationals completely and coning out, and finishing 12th? And they're like, no, it was awesome that you just didn't care and you just drove, as hard as you could drive. That's cool. You didn't lay up, for, to try and win a $450 tire, And I'm like, well, cool. And I mean, in the end, it's kind of funny. That's why, if you've been on Facebook or, looking around, I am constantly getting a rash of shit ever since September, about knocking everything over. And the funny thing is, it's not me. I had never done that in 20 years, before. I can only ever think of one other time was just as bad. I coned out twice. I coned out one side of a pro solo. And one year it cost me a championship in 05 in an MR2 turbo, which was kind of heartbreaking. And, the other time really didn't matter. It was the year I was in the RX-7 and, who cares? But, it's not common. I still don't know why it happened. There are cones that I had no clue that I even hit. And, I have pictures of where I just barely based them. I was right on the money. I just missed by a millimeter or an inch or something in a big car. So,
well, I don't think people realize how close and how often the cones are touched by the fastest people. Basically, I think the fastest people are within inches of most all of the cones that are limiting us. And therefore, you're going to touch some, and you're going to get away with it sometimes, and sometimes you're not.
But yeah, and that whole story was relating to the C5. So right, you're exactly right. It's a game of inches. It's a game of thousandths of a second, right? So if you have to be that close to the cones to run a competitive time, if the car is bigger and you physically have to drive a little bit longer distance around those cones to not hit them, it's not exactly an advantage. Now, to flip that thing all around, if you say, well, I want a dual-purpose car that I want to be able to drive on the street, and it's a nicer car, or I go to track events a lot or something like that, hell yeah, the C6 has it all over the C5 for that stuff. It's got way better brakes. It's got an oil cooler the C5 doesn't have. There's a million reasons why. I just look at the cars and go, in my personal opinion, that car is cooler than that car. And I had a C5. I had a fixed roof coupe that was it was Mark Valera's old A stock car, and I had it for a while. And I started messing with it for STU. And Nick and Caitlin Dunlap were looking for one to build for STU and just couldn't find one in Florida that was nice and had stuff. And I had already had the headers done on mine and things. So Nick called me one day and he goes, "I can't find a car. Please sell me your car." And I remember thinking about it going, I was basically daily driving the C5 and only autocrossing the C6. And I kind of went, I said, all right, look, here's the deal. It's low miles. I've got stuff done to it already. I can't give it away, but I'm not going to make any money. Basically, I'll break even on it. So here's the price. Do you want to do it? And they basically immediately went, yep. So begrudgingly, I'm like, well, all right. But I don't know. Every time I would drive it, I would get in the C6 and go, oh, this is I think more where I belong. And if it cost me a championship in the end, and it did, like in 2015, I lost the Grant by 4 thousandths of a second.
And I think you also won. We're talking about game of inches. I think you also won SSR by .004.
No, I've never won SSR for nationals actually, just for Pro Solo.
Oh, well, I looked in the results there, and you were a .004. I'll pull it back up maybe while we're talking.
Back. Yeah, it was second last. That was in 2015.
Okay, I didn't write down the year in my notes here. Yeah, .004.
Yeah, no. I think it was the third. I forget. You have to look in Rocky's book, but it was like, I don't know. It's like tied for like the third closest margin of victory or loss, I guess, in my case. But that was awesome. And the thing is, this is exactly the point. I would kill to win SSR. Like back in the day, I would kill to have won F-Stock before I actually won it. And I was on fire. I mean, in the second day, I hit a cone. I hit a stupid cone on day one. My third run, I made a mistake, and my foot actually slipped off the brake pedal. And I had to avoid hitting a wall on the West course. And so on day two, I went in like 7/10 down, at which point I went, well, kind of like I did this year. I'm like, nothing to lose. And proceeded to paint the town black. I mean, black tracks. And I mean, I was driving my ass off. And I think I'd have to go back and look. I seem to remember between Grant, Reeve, Josh Luster, and me, I had 3 of the 4 fastest scratch times on the course. Two of the 3 fastest times, and then I coned another one that would have been third or fourth fastest. I mean, I was on fire, and I made up almost all of that gap. And I had that morning. We went to grid. We shut the car off. We started the car. It wouldn't start. Went to start the car. It wouldn't start. We had jump boxes. We had 2 jump boxes. We pushed out a grid, and kind of got griped at about the grid workers about get back to your grid spot. Trying to pop start the car. When it finally fired, it lost its memory for the tire pressure sensors. So we couldn't turn the stability control off. So Mike had to make his first run with the nannies on. Luckily, he managed to find a down cone and got a rerun, and then we finally got the whole thing resolved. But it was so frustrating. By the time I made my first run, I was out there just burning, copious amounts of Hoosier off the car on the back. And the whole time I'm driving the car going, calm down, calm down, calm down. But I was so amped, that I couldn't calm down. And it was still a fast run. But when Grant made his third run, and I told him this, I tried to make sure I was one of the first people there, because I think being a good loser is more important than being a good winner. But when he made his third run, I knew where I was. I knew what my second run was, and frankly how good it was in terms of my ability. And I saw his run, and I did the math in my head, and I went, I don't know if I can catch that. And it was, a minuscule amount of time. And I tried, and I basically backed up my second run, which came up marginally short. But Grant was super gracious. He was even texting me on his way home. He goes, frankly, I consider that a tie. And I said, well, that's very gracious of you. And really, I appreciate it. I'm like, but you shouldn't say that. And he asked me, well, what do you mean? And I said, because a tie goes to the next second run on day 2, which was me. And like 10 minutes goes by with no response. And I put a smiley face under it. And then all of a sudden he writes back and he goes, yeah, never mind. But, it's an awesome class. And I mean, if anybody has a chance, if you're thinking about a C5Z, whether it's for A Street or super stock, it's kind of surface dependent, with the tires and stuff. But the cars are a riot. I don't know where else you can buy a low 12-second car that gets 27 miles to the gallon on the highway and can dust off pretty much anything else. And it's competitive in, 2 different stock classes and with nothing but a tire change. We don't even change. My setup works the same. When I change back and forth from Rivals to Hoosiers, all I change are my shock settings.
Wow.
I don't change the sway bar setting or anything. It's an awesome car.
If you can have any SSR car, they're all free. What do you think people should be trying?
You mean if money rained from the sky?
Yeah, they're all free. I'm letting you have a choice here.
9972 GT3. It's not a matter of trying them. I've driven them. I know what they can do. It won't sit well with people, but the few people that have them, it doesn't bother me. And again, I can't tell a lie. I've driven them. I've driven them on Hoosiers. I drove one early a couple years ago, actually, and it was at a kind of fairly local event, and I had people I had never ever seen before in my life walking up to me going, "Oh my God, I can't believe how fast that car is," and pretty much dusted everybody off that was there. How Porsche manages to bend the laws, that they are unlike left foot breakers. Somehow Porsche has managed to bend the laws of physics with that car, and I don't know exactly how, but that if you know how to make the back of that car work, and again, with my time in the MR2s and stuff, I can make the thing rotate. I mean, it just doesn't do any wrong, and the one on paper Achilles heel of a car is torque. It's got a lot less torque, but if you ever stood there and watch, those cars run against our cars, they get out of corners as harder than we do. The gearing's not even super deep, which is crazy. The red line's pretty high, so there's a gearing advantage because they go about 81, I think, at the top of second gear. So they're kind of in between like what the C5 can do and what the C6Z can do on gear. But my car only goes 90 in second because I can go 7,000 RPM. The Porsche can go like 8250 or something.
I've not been on top of it. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's fast. I mean, they're light. They're awesome. I am a big Porsche fan. I always have been. I don't hate them. I think people think I do, but it's only because it's a supercar. And, to me, what I try and tell people is very simply this. If you look at the results of Super Street and you compare them to A Street, it's clear that the Porsches are faster on the same tires. So why doesn't that apply to SSR? And there is no answer to that. Nobody ever wants to give me an answer to that because the only answer is, well, it does apply, but we don't care. I don't really have a problem with it except for the fact that, SSR is an awesome class. On the East Coast especially, we have great numbers. Big enough, bigger that even when we get to nationals with no West Coast cars, we're bigger than a lot of other classes. I don't know how a car that was only built for essentially 2 years that has something like, I forget how many 9972s there are, but it's some small number, 500 maybe, something. I don't remember. It's been a couple of years since I wrote a letter. That's a pretty rare car and a very expensive one that's appreciating. at a pretty good clip. I just don't see how that's healthy for the class per se. We don't have any running, so but it gets to the point like anything when there's something running that isn't accessible. It was the whole reason for street tires. Hoosiers cost too much money; they're not accessible to everybody. Okay, well, how does that apply to a $1,000 or $2,000 set of tires, but doesn't apply to a $130,000 car? I don't get it. But that's exactly what I would drive. I would drive one every day. I would drive it through the winter if I could only ever have one car. But then again, I never thought I'd have a C6E. So maybe someday I can have what I like to refer to as a super Beetle.
No kidding. Yeah, I was telling Salil, like, everybody I've talked to says this car should be an SSR because it's supposed to be the car to have. We should probably get some Hoosiers. He's like, huh? Really? I'm like, I don't get it. I've never looked at the classes, but I asked the guys, this is probably 8 or 9 years ago, they were all the Superstock guys. They were not all, because you might have been in the class, or maybe actually it was right before you got in the class. There were 3 or 4 of them, and they all said the GT3, and that was, I guess, the previous model. But they were like, that's the car. Now, having driven one, they are a challenge. Like you're saying, you have to get, I think, the alignment, the rake, and all that stuff set up just right, and then have the skills to move it around. But it's been fascinating hearing so many people that have driven them say that's the car they would take or choose.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just a good mix. I don't know that they're – well, funny story. There's 3 of them basically that run – there might be a couple. I mean, well, I guess you guys make 4, but thinking in the past about cars that run super SSR, there were 3. And then there were 2, and then there was 1. Now there's basically 1, and it only runs ladies. But a couple years ago, and this is the thing that kind of irks me about – and this is across – solo in general, right? It is like a lemming effect sometimes, and there's people that are willing to listen to other people just because they think they know something, right? So there was 2 cars. One, they were one was constantly being wrenched on. It was always being screwed with. It was this, it was that, and the owner of that car would go on and on and on about how this other car was just completely screwed up, and the people who were setting the car up, who were not autocrossers, have no clue what they're doing. And we're going to go up on the test course, and we're going to fix that other car. And then that happened, and they took both cars up to the test course, and lo and behold, guess what? The car that was the gold standard for an autocross car was terrible compared to the other one. At which point, and I called them. I called that person on it basically, and I was like, I thought your car was the cat's ass. And it was kind of like, because of course, it was not. It was at the top. It would win some events here and there, but some of them it walked people, in SSR. Some of them it was nowhereville, And I'm like, well, you can't say that your car's the best when you don't know that that's the case. And that's the thing. I think classing decisions are made that way. And when you have a unicorn car, whatever it is, whether it's something like a GTR or something that, not everybody else has. I mean, if you think about it, SSR pretty much beyond that is a spec class. Gary Thomason, who was, one of the first ones, he jumped into a 996 GT3 almost right away when that car went into class from a Corvette. And was fast, and he won. And he's got, a list of championships as long as his arm. So it's kind of hard to discount what Gary thinks. Plus, he drives cars for a living, right, for AMCI. He's not a dumb guy. When he freaked about the 9971 because it's the 996 but this much better because it's another 50 horsepower and bigger wheels and all this other kind of stuff, I'm okay with the 996. I'm even okay with the with the 997 too. It just, I'm not loving it. I think it's silly. If there were 100 of them showing up, or 50 of them, or 10 of them even to support the class, I would shrug and go, okay, time marches on. But if somebody were to take one car that existed in teeny weeny little numbers and dump that into, say, I don't know, let's say E Street or STF, or well, maybe not F's the best, maybe ST is the best example, and it started decimating like your Civic all of a sudden, and it cost 15 times what any other car cost, I don't think that car would hang around very long. And that's my problem in general. It's not that I dislike anybody in the SEB or something, but some things happened that there were some, when I was on the stock class committee, there were some blatant lies that were told to us that of course I called people on, which didn't ingratiate me to anybody. And I know, it wasn't the most expedient thing to do politically, but I just couldn't keep my mouth shut because I can't stand hypocrisy. And that's where we end up. It's an awesome car. I would kill to have one. But I don't think
kill me.
Yeah, no, that's cool. But I also don't. I think something where you got to spend $12,000 to replace the brakes is a little beyond autocross.
Well, I also hear the diffs don't last in those things. They say the diffs are always bad, so they just don't even.
That's what I hear.
Mess with them. I don't know. I can't tell.
I don't know if it's true,
but
yeah. But if it's tearing up a diff every year, autocrossing it, or in transaxle. I know the 996s. Even when they were around, they weren't proing those because they would break transaxles.
Yeah, they'd pop out. I remember some of that happening.
Yeah, 997's obviously it's stronger. I've seen them take some pretty brutal punishment over the last couple of years and not fail. But again, you don't have 20 of them to look at. A couple of them haven't failed. That's great. Does that mean they're all not going to fail? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm all for it. I frankly voted when I was on the SAC. I voted for that car to go into the class. It was on the exclusion list. I said, yeah, maybe it's time. The word on the street. Of course, I hadn't driven one. Nobody had driven one. But the word on the street was it was supposed to be, worse than the 996. So at the same vote, we also voted on the Viper with the 600 horsepower motor. And I said, and a bunch of us, all of us in the SAC, were like, look, this is a move, and if we don't think the move is right, it can be undone. Car can be moved back out within a year. And of course, the way the SCCA is, that's always the excuse given for trying something different, and yet in the end, nothing ever comes of it. So the Viper was fine. Thomason went and bought one. He was very competitive. I think he was second that year at Nationals. But the Porsche, my thing with the Porsche is people just started winning in them that had never won anything before when they had competitive super stock cars before.
Meaning they're that much better, yep.
Yeah, and to me that was pretty indicative. Either this person after 10 years learned how to drive suddenly better, and he's not at all a bad driver to begin with, or something changed, and the only thing that had changed was the car. So,
hey, Sam, it did not help me. Not yet, anyway.
It will when you know the trick, dude. The car. I mean, it's a phenomenal car. It's very. Well, it's the only other car other than John V's car that literally I would get out of bed for every run like giggling like an idiot.
True. That's what kept me driving it. I was like, I'm not really competitive, or I'm not very consistent locally. Yeah, with the packs is pretty easy. But oh my goodness, I would thank him. I'd come back and drive it and be like, thank you for letting me drive. I'm
telling you, man, when you figure out, and I would almost probably spend an event trying this, do nothing but get your left foot off the brake and do nothing but chop the hell out of the throttle on the way into the corner and just make the thing move. Even if it's too much, just spend an event making a move. Because if you can do 4, 6, 8 runs like that, like basically realizing, oh yeah, if I chop the throttle this hard here, this is how much it steps.
Yeah.
It doesn't really step. It's just that it pivots, right? And sometimes it'll over-rotate on you, but it's not going to kill you. It's not like a 1970s 911 or anything like that. And the other thing about them is this. When they rotate, this is the beautiful part about it. They have so much rear tire and so much grip, and probably even more so, in Colorado because of your altitude. It would be less this way, in Topeka or in Lincoln. But when they start to pivot that way, when you want it to stop, it's easy. You just hit the gas. Because all that rear engine and all that grip, boom, it pins it down. And, I mean, unless you've got a really big slide going on, that would be bad. But I would, me to you, I would spend an event, just provoke it. Just provoke the hell out of the back of the car. You will figure out real quick exactly what you can do. And you'll have to toss an event away to do it, but it won't take you very long to realize, oh, okay, if I rip my foot off the gas at this speed or this hard or this much, this is how much the back of the car moves. And then you can kind of apply that to like different radius corners, and you'll be good to go at that point. But that's the key, though. It's got to be the entry to the middle of the corner. You got to get rotation there.
The next episode will be the second half of Sam Strano's interview. Let us know what you think.
Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk.
You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.